Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
I'm a fan of classic movies.
Hello and welcome to Overlapping Dialogue, a podcast of double features dedicated to programming the finest, most eclectic, and downright bizarre film pairings and cataloging the discussions that ensue. We're your gruesome twosome, Kyle and Levi Huffman. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Levi.
Here we are, ready for episode 73 of Overlapping Dialogue, but we got some very sad news for the Chelsea fans listening to us today. Levi, you're a Chelsea supporter. You just saw, I can't remember, it was Manchester City just beat Chelsea 1-0, and they also just clinched the Premier
yesterday,
League,
technically,
right?
With some other losses, yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the state of
okay,
things?
So first of all, we're all just looking forward to next year as far as Chelsea goes.
And as a Raiders fan, you're used to being in that place.
Yeah. But this is particular, I don't know. I think what this whole soccer season has represented to me, I guess, because I've kind of come into the middle of it. And
this is your first season following
really the last half, because it goes for like 10 months. So, really since the World Cup, pretty much, is when I've been paying attention. It's kind of hard to believe how long ago that's been already now.
Yeah.
But it's just getting a little distressing for me personally. Every time I start a new team, this is what happens. So it's just like, okay.
So do you feel responsible for
No, not really, actually. Because, I don't know what there is to be, because the team is too good to be doing as bad as they are. Ultimately, it's just the managerial and the front office. That's the whole problem of it,
Yeah.
But further to me, because I've already accepted Chelsea's fate, but I kind of stopped paying attention to the kind of top of the table stuff for a while. And then all of a sudden, Arsenal was just out of it and has kind of been doing not as great the last, 2 months. And has lost some games and has led to where Manchester City was able to take control. Of course, those who remember, Manchester City's been accused of a lot of financial misdeeds and all these various allegations about them paying for players they weren't legally supposed to do, as far as the Premier League rules, and that's kind of why they've won 3 in a row and 7 out of the last 9 or whatever the number is of Premier League titles in the past 10 years or so.
Yeah.
And they're also poised to win the Champions League probably in about a month or half a month, about a couple weeks. So it was really just quite a disgusting display, all told. And this always happens to me. And what I mean by that is, in the case of this, Chelsea just so happened to be in that game. But by the way, Chelsea lost a game.
Yeah.
Which, go figure at this point in the season. But at the same time, it's like, oh yeah, Chelsea, I guess they were there. I don't know. Oh, look at this. Oh, look at that. It's like how everybody talks about the Immaculate Reception. And it's like, well, guess who that was against? The Raiders. Or, the Tuck Rule. Guess who that was against? The Raiders. It's always some... it's like the teams that I enjoy are always minor factoids in sports history, it seems like. You know what I mean? It's like... Now, this is... And I should say...
To be clear, the Raiders have won 3 Super Bowls.
The Raiders have won 3 Super Bowls. Chelsea has had a history of being very good and winning, and... I think they've won, I looked a while ago, I think it was 5 Premier League titles. They've won, I think, 2 or 3 Champions Leagues. They won the Club World Cup a couple years ago. So it's not like but it's me is what it is. Mm-hmm. It's just I guess since I'm not as great at sports, that's just the way it goes. I don't know, but you know what frustrates me more than anything is that there are a lot of Manchester City fans in my life at random places, different people.
Well, I guess they're kind of seen as a bandwagon team,
and so
especially in America. I guess people are like, "Oh, we're the most successful English soccer clubs. Oh, them. Oh, well, I'll get into them." You know.
And for me, why I picked Chelsea was, first of all, I like their colors,
the blue. Yeah.
I also was an old Pulisic plays for them. I'll just start pulling for them, and then I started liking a lot of the other players.
Mm-hmm. Everybody's got to have some entryway into something.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, but yeah, and there are a couple Manchester City fans in my life, and I love you all deeply, but screw you all. And moving on. I don't know. I mean, it really was quite, because also I just don't like a lot of the players on that team. De Bruyne, I don't like Haaland. I know Aaron Haaland's like the biggest player in the world or whatever. Really, the only one I like is Gundogan, who was on the German national team. He's German. He's the only one I'm even remotely interested in. I think he's going to retire, so it's like, okay. But, yeah.
So there you go.
So that just happened here just a while ago, so which was no surprise. But yeah, it is quite fascinating that a team could be so, it's like I never felt that way exactly about the New England Patriots and Brady per se. Mm-hmm. I started to feel that way more towards Brady when he went to Tampa Bay. I was like, okay, I'm done with this. Yeah. But I kind of get an idea of what that felt like.
Retired twice.
Right. Well, also, I didn't watch all this over years and years, so I know other people are even more mad than I am, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, just coming into this, it's just very distasteful and ridiculous. The best thing is that everybody stormed the field, which is normal, but then they had to clear it so that they could have the whole trophy lift and that whole thing. But there were all these... That is
it's from an outsider who looking at English soccer or soccer in general. It is interesting that they go by goals scored basically as their point system.
Or by wins. Wins is
wins, and I was thinking about if they tie, they get points.
Anyways,
but they don't have like a playoff system necessarily. No. That it's just
it just ends, and there's like another week next week.
So it's almost just playing that out, which is very.
And it sometimes happens where it's earlier than that, but usually it's a little more competitive down to the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's strange. It's weird. It's not even like the World Cup, which is like a playoff or other cups. It's just literally all they won. Yeah. And so, yeah.
Do you know anything about MLS in terms of do they have a similar system?
I assume it's probably the same thing. I don't really know. I haven't followed that much. We're actually going to go to a game of that in about a month. Mm-hmm. But for Charlotte, I'm going to play Montreal. But, yeah, I don't know. It was interesting to watch this season and kind of get a feel for the way it works. And next season, I'll follow it the whole time, and it'll be different. And hopefully they won't win again. I don't know.
Yeah.
Hopefully Chelsea will have a better season. But, yeah, it just really was a disgusting spot. As like I said, you were actually waiting for me so we could start recording. I was just sitting in there watching it, and then by then I was like, why don't I sit here and watch all this? Like, why am I doing that? More, I guess, because it's the first time I'm seeing this happen, and so I wanted to see it. But, yeah, it's just really frustrating when you're in situations like that, and it's, oh, by the way, Chelsea happened to be there in this game.
Right.
It's like, but we don't care about that. It's like, which, I mean, I guess not. But I'm not saying the team even deserves our interest right now. I'm just saying, like, okay, I don't know.
Wasn't a similar circumstance, but having Carolina Panthers lose 2 Super Bowls in my lifetime, where they're up off to the side of this other quote great team. Right. You know what I mean? Is always frustrating. But the movies we're going to talk about today are both from 1992, Hard Boiled. Of course, Hong Kong action classic, and Basic Instinct.
An erotic thriller classic.
Erotic thriller classic in another way. The direct connections between these movies are not as clear-cut as maybe some of the other ones we've done. However, they both are about, there's been a lot written about sensationalism across various eras of cinema, with sex and violence, and these are two of the biggest examples of violence and sexuality in movies in general, especially in the 90s. So in that way, they have a connection. Again, Hard-Boiled's, of course, from Hong Kong. Basic Instinct is, of course, an American movie, but directed by Paul Verhoeven, who's, of course, from Europe. So there is a little bit of an outsider perspective with that. But before we get into all those films, we just gotta dig into that Blue Plate special.
Hi, Audrey.
Norma, have a cup of coffee, please.
Sure.
I'll have what she's having.
Hey, who wants to watch pepperoni? Coming up!
The Manchester City cheaters are right here. Still cheating.
I know in a similar way, like all the call stealing and stuff that had been going on with the Houston Astros the last few seasons, that when there's been people throwing cold water on the various titles they've won over the last few years in a similar way. But
anyway, sorry to bring that back up.
Speaking of mourning, first we want
Speaking of other stupid crap,
we want to mourn the loss of a
one of us wants to, I guess.
Fictional legend.
Maybe I'm mourning the loss of sanity in this situation, but
is Rick Dalton, who it was announced on the Video Archives podcast and the social media feed this last week.
Maybe Roger Avery was trying to hide his laughter. I don't know.
Was passed away,
or his past manslaughter charges. But,
excuse me, at age 90.
Yeah.
So he'd been with us.
I'm just going after everybody today.
Ever since 1933. Rick Dalton had that. That was.
How long are you gonna play this out?
Well, again, Rick Dalton. Again, he had a very varied career. I mean, he was mostly known for his Bounty Law was the most successful TV show he had been on. He did some movies in the mid to late '60s that were never quite achieved that level of success. He did, though, have an encounter with various hippies at the very tail end of the '60s. Very close, strangely, to the Sharon Tate home, where he and I believe his stunt buddy Cliff Booth fought off some hippies. Levi, what's your biggest takeaway though from the death of one of screen and TV screen's biggest legends passing away at age 90?
Well,
other than the fact that he's a fictional character and not real,
right?
Other than that, what's your takeaway?
Well, I was going to say I didn't know that we were now in play acting like this is a radio play or something. That you're, I commend you for your effort.
This is, of course, Rick Dalton was, of course, played by Leonardo DiCaprio in Quentin Tarantino's 2019 film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood,
which I love. I want to be clear. I love that movie. I think it's great.
What do you think about the announcement of a fictional character's death?
Hell. I mean, you think a lot about the, you think a lot about artists and their egos. Then you reach new levels. You didn't even think that Tarantino could reach a new level of ego.
Oh, I mean, never underestimate that.
Oh, exactly. I mean, who would have thought that I would have doubted?
And I've been predicting this for a while. Whenever he's been predicting I'm only going to do 10 movies, and so this next one will be his 10th movie according to his math, because he's counting Kill Bill as a single film, which whatever. But that movie's going to be like cinema.
The final film.
Cinema is over at the very tail end. I mean, I say all this as a fan of his work.
It will probably literally say the final film of Quentin Tarantino. Like that's a certainty.
The 10th and final film.
Right.
Anyways.
Which why he had to come up with a number to stop himself. I don't really understand.
Yeah.
Which is
very arbitrary.
It's like he's such a big fan
let's
of
get
people
back.
like...
We need to get back to the death of Rick.
Hang on a second.
Here.
He's such a fan of like Don Siegel and those types. And it's like, well, did he stop making movies when he got old? That's his whole thing. Is like,
I think his whole argument
like,
is like, directors go downhill once they reach a certain age. we've talked about this several times on this
Don
podcast.
Siegel rarely got up the hill.
There's been a lot of
okay.
older directors working now that have been working for decades that have made some of their best work in the last so many years. So that's a curious thing, but observation.
Yeah, I don't know. Also, just the fact that I want to jump over here real quick. We will get back to this BS soon. Don't worry. That Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was a very interesting, worthwhile book. The book, I mean.
Yeah.
That had problems, but I think ultimately was very good, and I enjoyed reading.
Mm-hmm.
The little bit I read of Cinema Speculation was pretty god-awful.
That mostly did get
and
bad reviews.
I'm thinking about actually selling that book on eBay just because I'm on a big eBay tear of selling a million different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I only read a little bit of it. It was I wrote a whole thing about that on my what the hell is this? Hang on a second.
So
what are you looking at here?
It says The Films of Rick Dalton is an upcoming novel written by Quentin Tarantino. Details the life and film and television career of fictional actor Rick Dalton. His main protagonist.
No, it's going to be like a fake biography?
Yeah, character biography.
Okay. Well, see, now that's slightly interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, there's a whole Ralph Meeker section.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, whatever. But, you know, I know he's always said, "Oh, I want to be a novelist. I want to write movies." It's like, I don't want to see you write about anything, unless novels. I'd be interested in because that's at least something. I don't want to hear him talk about a movie ever again after reading that. Like, I'm serious. It was so bad. I was like, I can't even believe this.
The prospects of him also, creating a podcast with Roger Ebert, which I've listened to a lot of the early episodes and liked fine enough, but I kept waiting for him to all right, let's talk about some real worthwhile stuff, right? And they just kept circling the drain with either direct to video or a lot of crap, and I feel like he's
and there's some stuff I've heard about
explicitly reveling in
from that I want to see.
Yeah,
But,
and again, it was fun just to hear them talk about movies, even if I think Tarantino has one of the absolute worst tastes in relation to how great his talent is I've ever seen from anybody. Because he is a great filmmaker, even though he's not all of his movies are great, but he is a great filmmaker who has awful taste.
Yeah, because even with the book I was reading some of, and you look at the movies he talks about, and it's all stuff from the 70s, but mostly. But you look at that and you're like, yeah, most of these movies are pretty good or great, like in the case of maybe Taxi Driver or something. I don't remember if I don't think he talks about Godfather in there. I don't know. But a certain movie. But then you're thinking, yeah, but those are all the most basic opinions you could have on those things. It's like, I mean, I love Peckinpah, but he wrote a whole thing on The Getaway. I mean, that was
a movie that we don't particularly
and that was
love.
a whole. Well, we know why. It's because the two actors are wax figurines.
Well, that's what he's into, though,
right?
because
because we were talking about that.
I mean, he thinks William Shatner's a legitimately great actor,
and Aldo Ray.
Yeah,
and we were talking the other night, joking about that part in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where it was talking about Pete Duell and how, oh my God, he was so great, and he killed himself because he was an alcoholic. Well, I'm not making fun of any of that. That sounds very sad, but just, oh man, Pete Duell. I was just like, Pete Duell?
Yeah.
Pete Duell? Who is Pete Duell? Oh wait, he was on some show. I don't know. It's just, as we're going to say this a lot today. You like to play games, don't you? I mean, it's just a lot of crap opinions, and so therefore, listening to him is not a prospect I'm interested in. Getting back to all this, the childishness and the ego that you have to have of, this character died today. No, he didn't. He's not real. He is not a real person.
Also, he was shocked that he lived, and I say that in quotes, to age 90.
He was an alcoholic. He was a smoker. No, there's no way he would have lived that long. Also,
breathed in some flamethrower fumes at various points in his life.
Don't you think it's kind of just a little bit strange, too, and we're going to talk about this in a minute about Cannes. When was all this announced? In the midst of the Cannes Film Festival.
I was going to bring this up, too. I feel like this is a weird thing for him to say in the midst of all the things going on out of that, to say, look at me, this is going on right now,
look at me,
Yeah.
as they say. Yeah, and also literally right around the time that Killers of the Flower Moon
With Leonardo
is being
DiCaprio
released. And it seems
specifically,
almost like this competition or something, which is hilarious because and he's a Scorsese fan, loves Scorsese, and I'm sure Scorsese likes him.
Yeah.
But it's just like Scorsese would literally look at that and laugh.
He'd probably be confused,
and be confused and like, what are you talking about?
Well, and obviously Tarantino and Scorsese are both known for their love of film and encyclopedic knowledge in their own ways. But Scorsese has this thing about art cinema that it's good, mostly good. That's something that Tarantino has zero interest in. And there's probably deep down a part of him thinking for 2 seconds, like, wait a minute, was Rick Dalton real? Am I missing something? And then was like, oh wait, no, he wasn't.
Right.
Why am I
he
even thinking about
Leo,
this?
and Leo's like, no, Marty,
And he rolls his eyes
Marty,
and is like,
it's not.
no.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, specifically too, which is fascinating about DiCaprio in that movie was that I heard in some of they both talk about this, I think, some of the earlier drafts that Tarantino was getting really lost in this fictional biography aspects of Dalton. Probably because he's taken a lot of his love for the subject matter and creating a character that is
Elseworld Steve McQueen type.
Right, yeah. A what if.
Right.
And he's really getting off on that. And that DiCaprio kind of several times stopped him and was like, but what is the man? And I need to know who the man is. And Tarantino even has said that I love Leo and he got me back on track in terms of writing. And Leonardo DiCaprio is literally probably our greatest working movie star, and I say that in the presence of the Tom Cruise of the world, as far as his overall. But he helped guide that version was onto the screen. He had an instrumental role in actually getting to it.
And let me say, I do think that is one of his best characters, pretty easily. I think. Especially in a movie that has that interplay between him and Cliff Booth. And it's interesting that by the end of that movie, especially by the end of the book, which was even more about Cliff Booth's just straight up evil, actually. Because in the movie, you just think of it, he's just this cool guy.
Well, he's also played
really
by Brad
violent.
Pitt, so that just gives it.
But then when the book has even more details about just the overall awful violence that he visits on people. And you get this sense of the patheticness, though, of Rick Dalton, and he's just such a whiner and a loser. But you get this by the end of the movie and also by the end of the book, that feeling of, he really ain't so bad, especially compared to Cliff Booth, who looks cool but actually is evil, I think. Yeah. Not so and so, that all being said, you play it's just like you play dress up for a living. Get over yourself. I know this is a movie podcast, but no, this is you like playing games, don't you? I mean,
I'm not.
I don't know.
I'll say I'm not quite as cynical about Levi as all this is. There was a tweet, and what was funny on Twitter was there was a lot of this fake mourning of him, and oh my god, he was so great, and then the counter joke. He was problematic, and we can't celebrate that. Blah blah blah.
If he were real,
One tweet that I do genuinely actually agree with to a point, Brian Haley tweeted about this, said, lovely and revealing that Tarantino and DiCaprio crafted the character so iconic and beloved that an announcement of his passing triggered a cute, halfway genuine outpouring of grief. Now, again, I agree with a lot of things Levi's saying, but I do think, it's more than anything to me a testament to how popular that movie remains. And we have and again, there were people who decried
of it too.
People who decried aspects of the movie, and it was debated when it came out. But as the years have already it's nearly 4 years old, which is kind of crazy. Yeah. How long lasting and popular that is, especially with cinephiles as a film. Yeah. And it is one of the rare examples of while Tarantino himself has kind of gotten lost in the mythology of his own creation, the movie itself actually creates these iconic enough characters where people even care enough to have a response to them.
Like I said, the immersion of the movie, I think, is fascinating, and that's due in part to the production design also. But no, I mean, I love the movie. It's I always hesitate between it and Reservoir Dogs of what I think is his...
I say this as a huge fan of Reservoir Dogs, who forever said that was my favorite. leaving that first time seeing, I was like, oh my God, I think this is my new favorite Tarantino movie. And every time I've watched it, for me, it's only been confirmed by that.
Yeah.
Mostly because, again, for all the cuteness and moviness of it, it actually has this flesh and blood heart to it, which is not something you say about much of his work.
No.
So, in a way that even Reservoir Dogs doesn't have, you know.
Right.
So, I don't know. We just thought we'd mention this because it was kind of funny. Again, more than anything, I'm like, there's no way he lived to age 90. Again, there's
so dumb.
But he's also not real, so
that's my biggest thing. I don't know. I know it's become an emergent theme on here that I'm always like from the rooftop screaming, "These things are fake. This is not real," because we have actual issues and problems.
Yeah,
I don't know. Just kind of stupid and not worth anybody's time. But
except for this time we dedicated
right.
to it. Speaking of not real, Hypnotic. Hypnotic
yeah,
is
that
also
movie is
not
unreal for sure.
Well, also there's a Tarantino connection. Rodriguez directed this, so there's that. Hypnotic, the latest film from Robert Rodriguez, begins as a kind of a heist movie with a slightly supernatural / kind of horror-ish, thriller-ish twist, and goes in way bigger directions than I even expected.
Yeah.
Again, directed by Robert Rodriguez, starring Ben Affleck, who... I can't believe I'm saying this on this pod, but I've got to dedicate it somewhere, I guess. I'm weirdly... I don't know if coming around on is the word, but like warming up to realizing, okay, you know what? Like, he's done some okay enough things recently. And weirdly, his behavior, which has been criticized by the media, is something that I just find more funny than anything else. Because I didn't really talk about it much on here, I don't think. I liked Air, which he directed and was in. Hypnotic, again, I don't even know how to talk about this movie without spoiling it too much. The movie had actually like a $60-ish million budget. It is kind of flopping big time right now. What do you take away from Hypnotic? I know it's been a little while since we've seen it now, nearly 2 weeks. But
I liked it, but I don't know.
Somebody called it an Inception for dummies, and that might even be revealing too much about it even to say that. But
yeah, I mean, I don't. Just spoilers, I guess, because I want to talk about certain things about it.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, I don't know. I'm just getting kind of tired of movies like this, Reminiscence, which I thrive on watching because the movies that no one sees, I'm like, I want to go see that. But
that at least had this, like, kind of bigger awareness about it, even though it didn't make all that much money. This just kind of literally just came and went.
That are getting made now, though, that are like, oh, this thing, it's like this thing all the time, and it's like, even Stranger Things is a big version of that. I know we talk about it all the time, but I'm just getting tired of the homage.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or even conscious or unconscious. I mean, there as well, we already know what Orson Welles said about all that. But that, I don't know, it was a lot like that. It was a lot like the Terminator movies. It was a lot like Memento. It was a lot like X-Men. It just too many things. The Matrix, even. To where I'm just like, okay, I would have rather honestly just seen the movie it said it was going to be than,
I think for me, I would mostly agree with that. I do think, though, that like the part of the novelty of it is I was not expecting it was going to be as complicated in its own way as it was. And I was like, and it kept having twists in it, and I was like, wait, what? Like, we're going to do this now? We're going to do that now?
Yeah.
And, again, I would have liked, like, a more, again, low-grade version of what it was, but it was almost trying too hard because it realized the confines of its mediocrity, and so it was like attempting to, well, let's do this, let's do that, and it just, again, it didn't really take flight in a meaningful way, even though it was fine enough. I mean, it was entertaining enough.
Yeah, I mean, it had Alice Braga in it. I like Alice Braga. I mean, I don't know.
William Fichtner.
Well, I want to talk about
character
that. I mean,
Exit. We'll
just go ahead and talk about it because whatever. We have a very strange sense of humor, as many people probably know by now. But the final moment of it is of, I guess, her telling him the whole movie's about all this sort of mind control and suggestion, hypnosis essentially. And
But there's like this whole shadow world of hypnosis that
I don't know.
yeah,
Anyway, and like there's a part where it's at the very end and he's got a gun and he's basically told to shoot himself.
Yeah.
So he points the gun at his own stomach and unloads the clip into himself. And it was something that we like laugh and joke about around the house about like doing stuff like that to ourselves. Not with an actual gun, obviously.
No.
But like but it's like something we would laugh at and like, oh, what if that happened in a movie, but it actually happened, and it was just like, wow. Yeah. So if you want to see that, it is worth waiting for, I gotta say, but you won't be as surprised by it. Yeah, I don't know. It was just kind of, and then the movie's ending too was very just like, oh, that's it, it's over now.
I mean, the movie,
you
when
turn
I say
your back on family kind of situation. That whole movie's a big you turn your back on family movie. Anyway.
I don't know, like. I'm weirdly disappointed that it's not making more money. It's not that it's even all that good, but it's just like, it tried to do... I would say it tried those things, but again, as you said, it's like, it's a for dummies version of all these way better things. Yeah. And so, I don't know if it necessarily needed to be or should be successful, deserved to be successful, but it is kind of like,
Like, I enjoy...
all the other crap that's out there.
It kind of reminds me of Plane.
Yeah,
I enjoyed that.
That definitely knows what it is and is not trying too
well,
hard.
And it's not. And those are different movies by quite a bit, but it's just a movie that's kind of like, oh, whatever.
Disposable.
I want to go back real quickly. This just reminded me. I made a joke about you turn your back on family. Mm-hmm. Whichever like Fast and the Furious movie that was, whatever happened there? Because it was like, oh, he's making out with Charlize Theron in front of.
Yeah,
her, and then she has to do this whole face of like, I can't believe this. Like, how did that turn out? Because they're still in the same
Fast
movies
X.
together.
Yeah,
and
weekend.
It's like
that's actually the big movie this weekend as we're recording this. That's actually not making as much money as was expected, I think, too.
Why would it? They just keep doing the same crap.
Also, it's the first of a 3-part conclusion. By the way, I think they announced.
Okay, but. You know what I mean? Though it's like whatever happened there. What was it all a joke? Was he hypnotized? Like what happened? Did he unload a gun into his chest or stomach and then live? Because that's another thing about at the end. Supposedly there was a mid-credit scene of Hypnotic where William Fichtner's alive.
Mm-hmm.
Like
just to talk about the box office real quick. The top 5 films this weekend: Fast X, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, the Super Mario Brothers movie, Book Club: The Next Chapter, and Evil Dead Rise.
God, that's awful.
All sequels. We've already gotten to the point where we've accepted that reality.
Yeah, because I was just sitting here. My eyes weren't able to focus on what all those names were. But I was just looking, and I was like, all of those are like sequel titles, I can tell. Most of them. Like,
now, we talked about Evil Dead Rise last week. That was fine.
Yeah.
Well, Super Mario Brothers movie is not technically
year.
A sequel, but it's, of course, adapted from a big IP.
But this is that time of year where there's not a whole lot going on, so as far as that goes.
Yeah, I mean, we're officially in summer movie season already.
There'll be stuff coming up.
July actually has
in
some
June,
pretty big releases that we're actually interested in.
Another thing we'll talk real quickly about, Peter Pan and Wendy. What do you want to say about that?
Yeah, we don't have much to say about it. The biggest thing is the latest David Lowery movie. And as you know, Disney's been doing all these live-action remakes.
He did one for Pete's Dragon.
He did one for Pete's Dragon, which was a more recent movie anyways. That came out like the 80s. And The Little Mermaid is getting ready to come out.
You know what's funny about that movie, Pete's Dragon, that original one? When I think about that movie, I just sit and I think, oh, is that movie like some pot smoker came up with? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, Puff the Magic Dragon.
All that crap. There was a whole thing in the 70s and 80s where everybody was on weed and thinking everybody worshiped the devil. I'm just like, I don't really care about any of that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have much to say about Peter Pan and Wendy.
Sorry, I was busy. I'm sorry, I was busy not being alive, first of all, and second, I'm now busy listening to Peter Gabriel and Genesis. So no, I'm not into that whole play acting.
Yeah,
or crap. Anyway.
Again, I'm a big fan of David Lowery. Yeah. I mean, Old Man
big
the
fan
Gun.
Of David Lowery and big fan of Peter Pan. So
Old Man the Gun, I really think a lot of. Green Knight, didn't totally love as much as Levi did, but I did quite like. I mean, it's audacious.
What a
certainly.
memorable situation that was to walk out of.
Yeah,
But,
it does seem though. Actually, this is an arc we can already start to recognize in his career. And the movie, this fairly insubstantial, it still in its own way fits into this. Is that he seems like he is very interested in taking very basic mythological concepts and playing with them in some way, whether it be even as like something like Eight of Them Body Saints, like a Bonnie and Clyde-esque love story, bank, robbery kind of thing. Certainly with the ghost story, the whole idea of literally it's a ghost in a sheet walking around. Right. I mean, even something that basic. The Old Man and the Gun, of course, yet another kind of tweak for him on, like, say, basically a kind of a classic cops and robber story, going all the way to like Peter Pan and Wendy, which of course yet another tweak on the Peter Pan mythology, and then even, of course, the Green Knight with that. That does seem like that's something that he's interested in. Hopefully, and I say this as a fan, he goes into the next phase or step of his interest, because right now it doesn't seem like
he's made a lot of different types of things,
that's true.
Which is good.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for somebody who is such a kind of Malick kind of product of working with Malick.
And certainly Eight of Them Body Saints is very rooted in that style more so.
But yeah, that hasn't really still been a big, like, he hasn't stuck to that, which is good, I think. Mm-hmm. That he's just not another Malick or, whatever. But, yeah, I don't know. This movie was fine. There was nothing really wrong with it, but it just ultimately begged the question of why. I mean, the most interesting thing about the movie, and I feel like what the whole point of the movie is that whole revelation that Captain Hook actually was a friend of Peter Pan's.
Almost a former lost boy, basically.
Right, that left and tried to go back and live normally in
and then
real world.
He came back and was
older, and was angry that he kind of got sort of kicked out, too, I think, by Peter Pan, because he was like, oh, you left and you don't care or whatever.
Yeah. That was actually
interesting,
wow.
And the movie didn't play enough into that.
Yeah.
Also, the movie just didn't look that good, and I know that's just common with all these movies now, but even for David Lowery, I expected more. Well, I should say, I expected more from David Lowery, even in spite of that.
I mean, The Green Knight was one of the most visually interesting fantasy movies in some years. I mean,
had a lot of different color palettes.
Yeah.
And this was just looked like it had a stomach ache, is I think the way I wrote about it. But yeah, nothing a whole lot to say about that. It was just very basic. Like, why are we making this? I don't know. I'll just rewatch Peter Pan. But,
again, and people have been saying this time and time and again, and they're getting ready to say it again a lot with The Little Mermaid, which is coming out. But like, you just look at the visual beauty and the color of those movies animated. Like, and we love that original Peter Pan, from the 50s that this is based out of. And this just looks like muckety muck. Look at the same thing with
these Pinocchio, for example. And I know they made that Pinocchio movie they've been making or something. I don't know. Well, then they made that. Didn't they make one with Tom Hanks?
Yeah. That which barely got any discussion. I know at all. And then obviously the one that did get a lot of talk was the Guillermo del Toro. That's not at all Disney. That was a Netflix.
But that's movie. Just like. I remember seeing stuff from that and then thinking about the original Pinocchio, which we love. Yeah, it was one of our favorites. Yeah. The Rough House. But you think about the imagery of that, and it's just like, what the hell is this? Why are we doing this? Like, you even think back to the Paul Rubens' Pinocchio, and that was like better than that. It's just like, I don't know.
Don't forget about that story some years ago that Robert Downey Jr. was trying to convince Paul Thomas Anderson to do a Pinocchio movie.
He's like, why don't I do that? Like, basically. He never said that, but I know that's what he was thinking.
Yeah.
All right, you want to talk about Cannes?
Yeah, so...
we're in the midst of it. It isn't even over.
Yeah, so of course in 2020... we're in the midst of the 2023 Cannes Film Festival. Of course, that's in France. Arguably, we probably talk about Cannes here and there. Arguably, like, it's almost like the Film Olympics every year. I mean, every major national cinema submits movies, and it's literally, I think without a shadow of a doubt, probably the biggest film festival in the world.
Yeah, because I don't pay enough attention to Venice or I do pay
Toronto,
some attention to
New
Sundance
York,
a little bit, and I never pay attention to Tribeca. That's just something that or Toronto a little bit, but mostly it's pretty much Sundance and Cannes and the others kind of.
Well, they're all kind of split across the map calendar wise.
Right.
Sundance is always known as for the first big one of the year.
Telluride, sometimes you hear some stuff about too.
Cannes is always in May, and again, that has this huge international appeal that's trying to invite filmmakers and artists from all around the world, and it's the most prestigious. But then you have like the awards circuit movies of like fall time, where that's like Toronto and Venice and all.
Berlin's probably in there somewhere too.
Berlin, I think, is always early in the year, and it's like sometimes it's older like movies from the previous year.
Oh,
sometimes
is it?
play
Okay.
at it. I think. I'm gonna check on that to make sure. But Levi, for you, what headlines have you been following out of Cannes? Because for us as cinephiles in rural North Carolina, it kind of has this mythic, otherworldly. We're hearing dispatches from this other movie heaven that takes place.
I'll save the worst. I'll save the worst news for last. We'll go ahead and talk about some of the movies. You know what we're actually there for.
Yeah. So, by the way, Berlin is in February.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I know Magnolia won the Golden Bear, and that was in early 2000. So
I think didn't There Will Be Blood win that too? Maybe.
I'm not sure.
Or it was close to. I don't know. Anyway. Yeah, okay, so we have the main three things. There's a lot of movies that are playing at Cannes, obviously, but the main kind of three things that are big are the new Todd Haynes, Jonathan Glazer, and Martin Scorsese movies. Obviously, Killers of the Flower Moon, just as of this recording, was shown yesterday. It's been getting pretty rave reviews, I guess it would be described as. I haven't heard as much about the Todd Haynes movie. I don't really know what the buzz on that has been. Yeah. And, of course, The Zone of Interest.
That's been getting the highest, best reviews, I'd say, overall. From what
probably,
it looks like.
from what I've heard, is the shoe-in maybe for the Palme d'Or. I don't know. And that is that technically, I guess, a British movie? I don't know.
Let's see.
Because
it says United Kingdom and Poland.
Yeah, because I know it would have been filmed probably in
obviously.
Poland and be in Germany. Yeah, but who's going to put that out? Is it A24?
Yeah,
that's kind of halfway aggravating, but whatever.
Yeah. That's obviously not going to fit into their.
Well, his movie didn't. None of his movies have.
But Under the Skin's kind of sort of does with the horror element of it, but that was in very.
But
early
I feel like everything's been
days.
basing itself off of that almost because it's Jonathan Glazer. But
it's more genre.
Obviously, I'm very much anticipating that. And actually, Martin Ami just died yesterday, which is kind of strange that happened right after this was shown. So I've already ordered that book, and I'm going to read it before then.
I don't know if you mentioned May December is the name of the Todd Haynes movie. Yeah,
Asteroid City. I don't know when that's showing. It's probably in the next week.
Yeah, there's not been anything about that yet, so that's probably getting ready to screen.
The new Wes Anderson movie. But yeah, there's a lot of movies.
Also, our friend who was on the pod last week.
Yeah, Vim
Vendors' Perfect Days is
which
also
is strange.
in
I don't know if he got the
maybe that was why he wasn't here. Now we think about it, because maybe he was, he sent his the communicatory android.
Well,
of course.
yes, but I also wonder if he was gonna. I would think he would just let the android do all the talking, send that. But he's looking good.
Yeah,
he looks fit, healthy to be that age. Gotta say. Him, not the android. I don't know about that. That was kind of weird. That had this metallic glow. It's like, that we recently bought some Garbage Pail Kids. There was that one card that was like all the cards that were like the nickel-plated children.
Yeah.
And it looked kind of like that. I don't really know how to describe that. But
it says Perfect Days, the Vendors film, is actually going to premiere on...
Or no, it is an actual movie.
No, it says 4 short stories.
Yeah. That's right. I knew it was something like that.
About a toilet cleaner.
Okay. Also
in Tokyo. It sounds like it's ostensibly a Japanese movie almost.
The Almodovar movie came out too. That was a short film. Strange Way of Life or Strange Way of Living or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I haven't heard as much about that as far as what people think of it. But
I haven't either.
Anyway,
also, just to say, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Yeah, I was going to mention that has been a disaster. The fact that Harrison Ford won an honorary Palme d'Or is laughable. We were talking yesterday, though. I want to talk about this a little bit on here because we were talking about it on the way home. We went to Asheville yesterday, and we were talking about it. I asked Kyle, I said, what exactly is the vitriol surrounding this new Indiana Jones movie? And you said what?
Well, a lot of it comes down to A, why.
Yeah.
Secondly, or B, the CGI looks pretty bad or lackluster. And just the general, I mean, it fits into the general Lucasfilm fatigue by way of Disney now. And also the question of, wait a minute, so we don't have Spielberg involved in this anymore, Lucas isn't involved anymore. And also just that, like, well, I thought we did this already with Kingdom of Crystal Skull, which there's already started to be and this has been building for several years already, a defense of well, it wasn't so bad, and actually it might be the best one. Like, you know, some people just like saying,
well, some days it's the worst, but now it's the best. Like, I mean,
just like, no. And also then people, the vitriol against James Mangold. Oh my God, James Mangold sucks. Why did they pick him? And then it's like, come on. And there's people that were
everybody's already hating
like,
on the Bob Dylan movie that hasn't even happened.
It's like, okay, Ford vs Ferrari was very good.
Excuse me. You want to build a Ford to beat Ferrari?
Beat Ferrari. Logan was awesome.
I'm going to beat the drum for Riri.
The problem is not necessarily James Mangold with this movie that we've yet to see, and of course we're going to watch and have our thoughts on this
say
podcast,
that it sucks,
and probably be like, whatever, why? But like, that just seems so disingenuous to me. Oh, let's just totally trash Mangold's career because he made this one movie that was useless from every angle. Yeah. Why? Like, you know what I mean? Why was this movie made? Again,
John Rhys Davies needed a paycheck.
Somebody
pay his mortgage or something.
Somebody said that, like, we've already had 3, quote, last Indiana Jones movies. Last Crusade was already kind of fashioned as
and
like,
none of them are good.
But Last Crusade itself was fashioned as like, that's it. Mm-hmm. We're done.
And I would have been like, okay, yeah, good.
And Spielberg literally rolled up his sleeves and was like, all right, I'm going to go do like Jurassic Park and Schindler's List now, you know, by that point. But then, you know, by the mid-2000s, it was like, well, let's do one more. And I think that was fine enough to,
that also
by that
came
point,
off
try
of
to do
the resurrection of Lucas's career after the prequels, and that's part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean...
it is one of those classic things. We're just getting to the phase of a lot of these, what was specifically with Star Wars and Indiana Jones, very creator-driven properties, and we've seen this with Star Wars for some years now, that are no longer in the hands of the creators. Now, with both of these things, both Spielberg and Lucas both willingly throw their hands up and say, we don't care about this anymore. Right. It ain't like they didn't have the control and it was taken away from them. Right. I mean, no, they were like, no, Spielberg, what's he doing? Oh, he made one of the best films of his career with The Fabelmans. Yeah. And Lucas is rightfully so just kind of doing what seems to be nothing for him, which is totally
appearing in the backgrounds of documentaries, going to food courts, that sort of stuff.
But like, you know,
the stuff that retired old men do, you know.
But you know, it's just I don't know. There's a lot of vitriol being thrown against this movie. It doesn't look all that good, but also it's like, to me, the stakes of it being good or bad are so low. I mean, it's like, it doesn't matter either way, really. I mean, the best case scenario, it's fine.
That's not going to happen.
Worst case scenario, not good. The variance between those two things are so small. It's just like, who cares?
I know.
Like,
I think that's why my attitude towards it has been so lackluster, because they, even our cousin Philip was sent a text of that scene that they put out just before it showed at Cannes, of...
It's like a chase scene.
Yeah,
in the
it's like of the little. I don't know where it is. It's those little buses or whatever, and everybody's like, "Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god!" And I was just like, "What?" And everybody's like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "CG looked bad." I'm like, "Yeah."
There should also be said that there's apparently a lengthy de-aging sequence with Harrison Ford in the movie. Somebody said, why don't they just get Alden Ehrenreich to like play that like section or whatever in reference to Solo? But
yeah, it's funny. No, I mean, but,
so what? The whole thing. Who cares? Like,
what was funny? By the way, we'll come back to this in just a second. There was, I don't remember. I don't know if you remember this or not. I think we talked about it back in the day. I remember it was something that we talked about more in college, when I was in college, and that movie came out, and we talked about it. My roommates. There was that random guy that was on YouTube or something, that this actor that looks quite a bit like Harrison Ford,
yeah.
and he kept doing these Harrison Ford impressions, and people were seriously like, no, he needs to play Solo, get rid of Alden Ehrenreich. And I'm like, he can't act. And then, as it turned out, Alden Ehrenreich couldn't either, so it just kind of worked out, you know?
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, I just saw that, and I watched the scene of, it was like him jumping between stuff, and I just looked at it, and I was like, yeah, and I didn't ask anybody, but I kind of thought to myself, I was like, okay, what's everybody so mad about? Because to me, viewing something like that is so already a losing proposition. Like, I saw that scene, and I was like, my mind had already shut. It's interesting. My mind had already shut down to where it's like a new Indiana Jones movie. My mind just shuts down automatically. I'm like, okay, what is this? Harrison Ford in pretty much anything. What's this? What are we doing now?
Well, it's like we were talking about this yesterday. I mean,
they have not made a great Indiana Jones movie since Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Well, so, even Temple of Doom,
which is really good,
was very clearly an Indiana Jones movie, but doing something a little different than just the first one. And then again, I'm not quite as down on Last Crusade as you are. Yeah. However, I do agree that
these movies have gotten worse as they've gone.
Yeah, and like. Okay.
Yeah, I do not like. I want to be clear on this. I do not like The Last Crusade. I think that movie is a joke.
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull got a lot of hate, and I'm not about to say it's some underrated masterpiece. It might be the best one. I'm dumb as hell. Yeah. But
I would maybe even slightly prefer that one than The Last Crusade.
I thought it was at least like, I kind of like the kitsch of it, of like, 50s, let's do aliens. Like, I like
Daddy-O and all that, yeah.
I mean, some of that was kind of dumb, but I also kind of...
Remember how stupid the opener of that movie was, by the way, where they had like the groundhogs and Hound Dog was playing? It was like CGI groundhogs. It's almost like interesting sequence in that though was where they were trying to find the Ark, and they took shotgun shells and they took the pellets out of it, and it like was a magnetism of it or whatever. That was kind of interesting, but just a waste of time.
I mean, it's kind of funny that Indiana Jones in many ways became like the American version of James Bond, of course. And then it's so much even weirder than James, because James Bond, they're like, oh well, we'll cast another guy and move on. Obviously, Indiana Jones was already like a period piece in the 80s, like about the 30s. And so and I think this speaks to both the strength and also downsides of the character. It's so specifically tied to the triumvirate of Ford, Spielberg, Lucas, right? That, and the time period and the character. And I think that's a great thing in those movies, but then the further we move away from those things, the more it's like you just squint and you're like, is this even the same thing anymore? Like, for all of for even all the problems of George Lazenby, On Her Majesty's Secret Service is like, we're just going to keep going with this thing and do something different.
The other fella.
And the movie itself is very good, even though Lazenby's not great, but he's passable enough. The movie has its own problems. Right. Anyways, Bond found a way to kind of, and there's too many Bond movies, obviously, but it found a way to move on and survive. I just don't know if
even by like Goldeneye, for example, which is a really great Bond movie, is kind of even still post Cold War, finding new ways to still do things. Yeah, and I want to go back and say about Temple of Doom, which I know is a pretty divisive movie. Actually, it's weird because I know a lot of people kind of didn't care for it in the moment. It was also part of that wave of like kind of hyper-violent PG movies of like, movies that basically got the PG-13 to be a thing. That and Gremlins are the two big examples people use. But that...
Another Spielberg-produced movie in that
sense. And Poltergeist, well, that was rated R, but that was another thing that was a Spielberg... movie, maybe co-direct, maybe directed. We don't know. Yeah. But that with Temple of Doom, what I think is so fascinating about I keep using the word fascinating. I'm sorry. Yesterday it was fidelity. Now it's fascinating. But we weren't even podcasting yesterday, and it was fidelity, high fidelity. I don't know. I haven't even seen that. But that with that movie, what was interesting about that was, first of all, it was a different enough location than like Egypt Nazis. Like it was like, okay, let's go do this more
Eastern movie.
which is admittedly a lot of Orientalism in that, some Indian stereotypes, which are bad.
Yeah.
But I think, first of all, that is a better representation of serial and swashbuckling and pulp things than Last Crusade would be, with all its problems.
Or he met Hitler in that one. Yeah.
I don't even want to talk about that. That's literally the dumbest thing I think I've ever seen in a movie. Like, people talk about...
And let me just say, he
Jar
says
Jar
this
Binks.
regularly. This isn't just something you're
No.
I mean, you regularly talk about that. Yeah.
I remember when I first saw it, I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is literally the dumbest
And you
thing
said
I've
that as a
ever
child.
seen. Yes. No,
So,
literally,
yeah.
when I was a middle schooler, I saw it, and I was like, that is so stupid. And here we are. We'll talk more about that in a minute, actually. I want to say some stuff about that. And how that's kind of... just a stain on the memory of history anyway.
On the memory of Adolf Hitler.
What I mean is that it's making fun of that, and I'm like, I don't think this is funny. But that even with its problems of those, of kind of some, problematic representations of race and even sexism that's in, which was not as much a part of Raiders. But is quite a bit more of Temple of Doom. But that movie just has such a dynamism to it. Visually, narratively, action scenes that are good. Like, I mean, one of the most iconic images of Indiana Jones is him, that one of Harrison Ford on the bridge with the machete. Like, you don't really get as much of that, I don't feel like. And Last Crusade, just to say about that, literally says, let's do Nazis again. Let's do the Holy Grail.
Let's throw in Bond.
Right.
Yeah, with
and
Sean
so
Connery's presence.
People are so obsessed with that, I could literally care less. Like, that means nothing to me. Ah, Vienna. But that specifically also the tank scene in that movie where he straight up dies.
Yeah.
No, like, what?
There's in the nuke the fridge moment people talk about in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
But I don't know, I just still feel like Temple of Doom is a really moody, and there's a whole story behind that about their personal lives at the time of George Lucas and
Spielberg going through their divorces.
And so,
not from each other.
But also what's interesting about that came in the midst of their huge success of career-wise, and they still felt that way, which says a lot about show business, I think. But because there's no business like show business, as they say.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about another show business hack here in a minute. Don't worry when we get back to talking about Cannes.
Well, before we get to that, I want to actually talk briefly about the movie, some of the big... But
right. But that... Anyway, with Temple of Doom, that movie just is very moody and engaging and fun. Like I said, and it is very problematic, and it has a lot of things about it that are like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But still, even just just an action movie is good.
Yeah.
Consistently throughout what I remember of Last Crusade, which I admit I've only seen once, but that was enough. I remember watching that in 8th grade. We had watched Vic Wilcox, who was one of my favorite teachers I've ever had. We watched Raiders of the Lost Ark towards the end of the year because Nazis are in it. It was a vaguely World War II centric thing. And then we watched that afterwards, and we just skipped Temple of Doom because did we? I don't remember. I'd seen Temple of Doom a lot by then. So I watched Last Crusade, and that's a movie that is a lot of people's favorite by far. Most people think that, so everybody's just tuned out by now.
Yeah.
But I think it's just so lazy because, like I said, you get the Nazis back, you're doing the Holy Grail, which is kind of the laziest possible,
it's like literally like, what have we not hit yet?
Right.
Oh,
and
that.
Because even the Ark of the Covenant fits in with it being the Nazis want this Jewish artifact. That makes sense as a story.
Yeah.
Like, okay. Well, I don't really know why they'd want the Holy Grail.
So the whole night in it too,
that's just so dumb. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. It's just there's so many decisions in that movie. Then there's the whole sequence that's the basically the Hindenburg type thing. I know it's not actually the Hindenburg, but it's like this big blimp, this dirigible, and then don't they bring back a guy that looks like that big muscle man guy in Raiders?
So. I don't remember
and there's
that
a fight.
much. Yeah.
There's also
it feels like they know they're repeating themselves by the third one.
One thing that is funny in that movie though is there's that Nazi dive bomber coming down. And they're like on the beach, don't know what to do, and so he pulls out an umbrella and forces the birds into the plane.
Yeah, right.
Which is wrong on so many levels. Yeah, because I'm sure PETA gets pissed about that scene all the time. But it's just like, first of all, I don't know that would work.
Yeah.
But it's just hilarious subjectively.
I don't know if he had a Bond-like line after that. That would have been funny if they threw that in there. But
then there's that part that is...
The bird just took that effing plane down, you know?
Operation Bird Slam. Operation Flew the Coop. I don't know.
No, he should have jumped out of the dive bomber as it's coming down, and then he flew the coop, something like that.
Look, he's flown the coop, and then they would interrogate him or something. It would be like that scene in The Untouchables where you're effing with the G here, pal, or what, That's a bad movie too, as we've talked about multiple times on here, and we'll eventually do.
Yeah.
Anyway. What time is it? Right.
Yeah.
Anyway,
need to start to find an escape hatch from Indiana Jones.
But anyway, there's that one part though in it that I think's funny. They're having like a chase with motorcycles, and he takes like a pole and throws it into the wheel rim, and it flips the thing. That's pretty funny. But yeah, that movie I don't like at all, and I think is a joke. But all that's just to say. Getting back to this, all this vitriol that movie's received, I'm like, yeah, it's another Indiana Jones movie. Most of those are not good at this point, or I don't like very much. So, yeah. So that has been interesting. The fact that Harrison Ford got an honorary Palme d'Or, I think, is laughable too. But he's often been accused of being wooden, but that's also because he used to be a carpenter. So, I guess.
But the Zone of Interest, as we said earlier, that's been getting
and that's not my most anticipated, other than maybe Killers of the Flower Moon.
And let me just say that we might have talked about this back on the Sexy Beast podcast, the possibility of this eventually being a project. I didn't know that it was even this far along. I thought it was still.
I didn't quite know. I knew it was filming, but I didn't know it was done.
Again, I'm a fan of Jonathan Glazer's work, obviously, but and this was before I even learned even more about the Holocaust. Seeing another Holocaust drama was something that gave me a lot of pause, to the point of thinking, what is this going to be? Do we want to do this? And again, I say this to somebody who thinks we need to have tough, problematic art about all these things, but still, I'm just like, okay, yeah. But hearing actually the angle of what this movie is about, and just to give a brief overview.
And I think it's slightly different than the novel, too.
Yeah, so it's based on, as Levi said, Martin Demi's book, The Zone of Interest. The commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Haas, and his wife Hedwig strive to build a dream life for their family in a house in a garden next to the camp. And then hearing about how the aesthetics of the movie made me go, oh, of course. Of course he'd find some other way to do this other than let's just do another movie that's just this full-on awful depiction of that, and in its own way sounds like it's going to be a horrific
I think they said
film.
It doesn't really go into the camps. It doesn't
heard a lot of it's accomplished through sound design and the score by Michael Levi is doing the score,
and that you can hear the camp more than see it. But yeah, so I'd already known ahead of time, that's going to be really great, and thankfully it sounds like it has been. So, and
again, May December, that's Todd Haynes' film. 20 years after their notorious tabloid romance script, The Nation, a married couple with a large age disparity buckles under the pressure when an actress arrives to do research for a film about their past. Natalie Portman, Julianne Moore are both in that. And so again,
this will be Todd Haynes' first narrative film since Dark Waters, which has been a little while actually now.
Because we loved his Velvet Underground documentary, but how's that? And again, Asteroid City, that's not premiered yet.
We
but
talked about that a little bit.
That trailer looked pretty great. The Killers of the Flower Moon trailer came out a few days ago. I had no doubt that a Martin Scorsese movie was going to look and sound great because he's my favorite filmmaker, and we've talked about him a lot already. The movie looked amazing.
Yeah.
It's gonna come out theatrically in October, and I think it's
visually it reminds me
release.
quite a bit of the city scenes. Remind me kind of Once Upon a Time in America, and I just love the look of things like that. That's a movie I think is pretty problematic, and I have certain ideas about, but very Cimino-esque also. But yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that because it seems like, as great as his gangster movies are, it is always nice to see him do something different. And I know he's always thought about doing, he loves westerns, but it's never done a western. I think people are going to overblow this being a western. I don't think that is what it is exactly, but just to see western imagery from him, I think is good.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So again, and we've of course never been to Cannes, so it's always
never will get to go.
Yeah,
so,
it's always this far off
Right,
thing.
but
it's always it is one of those things. It does, even from the outside, give you an awareness of various films that are going to be of note in the months to come, especially coming out. So,
but to speak a little bit about the return of something.
God, yeah, I forgot.
I don't know how long we want to talk about Jonathan Dett today. Go look it all up. It's
Enemy
all
of the
there
pod.
for you to see.
Not a friend of the pod, enemy
no.
of the pod, obviously.
I heard that his...
So what's the movie, by the way, that
Jean de Barry, and it's something about King Louis XV and I don't know. And it actually opened the festival. It's not in competition. You know what the movie that's closing the festival is?
What's that?
That Pixar movie, Elemental.
Oh, really?
What a bookend that is. But anyway, the movie got pretty whatever reviews.
Yeah, it seemed like in a costume drama.
Right, and I think the lead of the movie, the female lead, is also the director. Mawan is her name.
Yeah.
And it's been getting pretty whatever reviews of just like, oh, it's just another biopic, who cares? But, oh my gosh, like, I heard how bad it was, but then I went and watched it. His
press conference.
The succeeding press conference afterwards.
Yeah.
Where he comes in like 20 minutes late into, I think.
Well, he's always wanted to be a rock star deep down, so
right.
This is where it scratches that itch for him.
Looks as bad as always. Looks like he smells like it's like, how like you open up a magazine and there's those like cologne inserts in them.
Oh, right, yeah.
Smells like that, but like you're sitting on a commode in a truck stop bathroom and you get the whiff of both at the same time. That's what I think he would smell like.
Yeah.
But anyway, and he starts getting
it's
asked
like this,
about...
It's just to clarify,
Yeah.
It's this combination of manufactured class with true petrified bona fide garbage. It's just like
right.
those two things together. That makes the career of Jonathan Dett.
And so he comes out there. He answers a couple normal questions,
and then he's asked a lot about.
And then he starts
the Amber
getting
Heard
asked
/ Me Too situation.
And he starts just mouthing off. I mean, he's not screaming and yelling. It's nothing like that. It almost makes it worse, though.
Well, he has this whole self-satisfied,
Right.
smug, amused, like, I thought we were over all this attitude about the whole thing.
Right.
And, it's always, usually a lot of the best things about Ken's press conferences, which are legendary in their own right, are watching the reactions of other people that are sitting up there. People that are just wanting to, there's always, in these circumstances, there's always... And it is a bad boy, always.
Yeah.
Always the bad boy loudmouth who is trying to make a name for themselves and or is the center of attention and revels in being the center of attention, while everyone else is forced to just sit there and,
like what happened when I said Lars von Trier, there's a version of that with the Hitler stuff.
Yeah, and then Kristen Dunst was sitting there, and she was even out loud saying, "Oh my God, stop talking!" a few times
there was
while
that,
he was talking.
And then, what's a more interesting one is the Crash can press conference, which is legendary.
Yeah, right.
That's kind of everyone is just pissed off.
Yeah,
like
right.
everybody.
Because that got a very
attendance.
bad reception by the critics.
Yeah,
and
which we
everybody.
love that movie, but I get why that would be.
Coppola
like, wow.
was famously the head of the jury that year, and he was like, "We are not giving this anything." It's kind of funny. It's like Coppola is someone who's a fan of art and has made great art himself. How he would have such a negative reaction to that, it's a little shocking to me.
But anyway, yeah. So
he starts talking about McDonald's.
That's the bit. You need to go see it for yourself.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to drop any clips, but
it's already become part of the lexicon. I feel like a lot of the things he says. I mean, there's that. The thing that's most confusing to me, I think he's talking about basically the basic BS of Cannes and film festivals of like. What he describes as the things you line your shoes with, or the things you stuff your shoes with, the things you line your birdcage with. It's a little boring, isn't it?
Well, and it's like your filmography?
And it's also like, well, your movie that you're here promoting is exactly that thing, by the way.
Yeah, what the hell is he talking about?
But then he starts saying something like, something bird records something parrot records unreleased Beatles song or unrecorded Beatles song or something, and it's just, and everybody's like, what's so funny about it? And I don't know if it's that the translations were screwed up, or
that's always a problem.
Right, or everyone was just like, but there was a lot of not a whole lot of laughter when he tried to make jokes. So. But another big thing was at the end when they said, a guy asked from, I think it's from Variety, he asked something like, well, what would you say to people who are criticizing you for coming to Cannes? And he goes into this long metaphor about, what if I was unable to go to McDonald's and there were 39 people sitting in a room angrily watching me eat a Big Mac just for fun, as he says it.
Yeah.
And then he says something about that towering pile of mashed potatoes, like,
and very much going into his Brando phase.
Yeah, it's like that mixed with that Canadian audience. There's a real mashed potatoes, no gravy, as we heard from Billy Bob Thornton.
Yeah,
just a total
one of my favorite
wreck.
Insults ever.
Yeah.
Just as a fan of mashed potatoes with no gravy, I just think that's a
and
great
Canadians,
insult.
and maybe not Billy Bob Thornton.
Maybe it was Canadians were like, why the hell is Billy Bob Thornton trying to be a musician? Yeah, anyways,
it's like. Yeah, I don't know. It's like when Lyle Lovett decided he was going to be in Shortcuts, which was a great performance, by the way. Just want to be clear on that.
Getting all mad about birthday cake.
Come pick it. Oh, how is he? He's dead. But that is an awful character, I gotta say. And you know what's so funny about that character too is he's the most basic looking chef. He has the hat.
He got a hat on.
It's just like it's like they were like, let's just what would a Lyle Lovett cake chef look like? Let's do that. Or cake baker, let's do that.
There's a lot to laugh at about the joke of a Jonathan dead. Excuse me. But I do, and it's easy to just laugh at it and roll your eyes and say screw him, who cares, and move on. He plays the same playbook that Donald Trump, a lot of people who are criticized for abuse or known abusers do, where they do this whole thing about, in so many words, specifically with that whole McDonald's yarn
about who cares what I do, or
that it all becomes like, if they can come after me, they can come after you, and it's just like this whole turning this whole victim. It's like you're literally objectively one of the most successful movie stars of all time. Act like it. Stop being a victim.
Yeah.
Same thing with Donald Trump. You're literally one of the most successful businessmen, at least one of
the most successful white men ever.
Yeah, and that these again, it's always going back to mostly being these successful white men who try to create this victimhood card when they have had nothing but success in their lives after a certain point. And it's like, they raise this, they raise an awareness from and love from fandoms that look at them as faultless, diseased, maniacs who. That nobody can do anything that can put them off of their pedestal. And if you don't like them, you're just a hater. And you don't get it, and you're part of the problem. And so in a very subtle way, as somebody who once made a short film making fun of Trump and very famously said, "Who's the last actor to assassinate a president?" Well, it's too bad you didn't, because we wouldn't have Trump and you'd be rotting behind bars. That's a win-win to me. You know what I mean? So it's too bad that didn't happen, right? But again, there's a lot about him that just really infuriates me in a deep level in terms of this victimhood
all
card
of
he
his
plays.
problems are self-inflicted.
Oh, yeah.
All of them.
Yeah.
We call him Jonathan Debt, his real name, for a reason, because of all the immense money wasting that he has done.
Yeah, there's a legendary
over
Rolling
the years.
Stones article
It
several
is
years
so
ago that went
bad.
through all that.
It is so bad.
Yeah.
The amount of money he spent alone on Hunter S. Thompson's funeral, which is an admirable act, let me say.
The one time you should be
The one
spending-
time you did something good.
Yeah.
It
Even
was just
still-
astronomical.
Yeah.
The amount it actually, literally, it was shooting his ashes out of a cannon, which was in Thompson's
Which
will.
I wouldn't weirdly think would actually be that much money.
No,
to
but
do,
it spent way more. It was basically a fireworks show, more or less. Because they made it the green gonzo, fist that he used when he ran for sheriff of
Nottingham or wherever the hell.
Woods Hole, Colorado, wherever he's from.
Or Kentucky. Well, he was from Kentucky.
But he lived in Colorado
Yeah.
most of his life. No, not Woods Hole. What is it? Owl Creek is where he lived.
Right.
I don't remember the name of the town. Name in town, as Bill O'Reilly used to say. Another scumbag. If you wish to opine.
He's another victim.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just interesting how much of that has really been self-inflicted and that he's gotten away with pretty much everything.
Yeah, there's
I was
only
having a
one more
conversation-
self-inflicted thing for him to do.
Yeah. Make a good movie. No, but I was just talking to somebody this week who will remain nameless. I don't think they listen to this podcast
Anonymous
anyway.
source.
That said, I was talking to about this. He's like, well, they kind of cleared all that up, and he didn't really do that stuff. And I was just wanting to laugh.
Well, that just
are you
proves that
kidding
all
me?
this was about restoring his PR as opposed to
yeah.
proving anything.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, and it's okay,
Which
Amber,
it clearly has
now
worked,
let me
unfortunately.
Say, clearly Amber Heard is also
Nuts.
a insane crone. Let's get that out of the way.
But he had a history
there
of
is no-
accusations
listen,
before her.
Yes, and you look at, and they also said, well, there were all these other people who said he didn't do things, and I'm like, well, I'll be.
Yeah.
Oh, where'd they find him? It's
Yeah.
it's just ridiculous. But anyway, and just, you don't need to know anything else other than the video, which is objectively him walking around the kitchen screaming and yelling, and it's there's no way that guy isn't abusive.
Well, right, yeah.
And it doesn't matter how much is manufactured, how much is this, how much is that. It's the same thing with the Bill Cosby stuff, which is obviously way more definitive that he did do those things. Where there's smoke, there's fire, always. I don't care what it is. If there's enough bad publicity surrounding something, that probably means it happened. So, yeah, whether or not Amber Heard was the one that got picked that all this happened with doesn't really matter, because it's all there for everybody to see. And if you don't, then you're just a fool or you're a liar.
But listen,
So,
Jonathan, we'd love to have you on
yes,
the
of
pod
course,
for you to clear yourself,
to call us a pile of mashed potatoes. Yeah, I mean, it literally does sound like Brando when you say that.
Yeah.
I miss Brando. Why can't we have Brando back?
He went the same way. Well, he wasn't.
Yeah,
he wasn't abusive, but
he was nuts.
Fat with success. That's what these guys' problems are. I mean, they just
Yeah.
I don't know. Now, I don't want to make this the. I'll find any way to praise Leonardo DiCaprio in any of these things. But I don't know. You look at what a movie star is like. What a movie star should be ideally is constantly challenging the material, working with great filmmakers, not filmmakers who are just going to put them in, say a Tim Burton, and do the same thing, rinse and repeat, time and time and again.
Yeah, right. With the Lone Ranger, that was the most. God Almighty, I don't even know. I mean, we could probably do a whole podcast on that movie and still have no idea what to say about it. I don't know.
Armie Hammer also involved in that. Yeah.
Also, I don't know.
So this has been your report from the Kansas Film Festival 2023.
We spent most of it talking about Indiana Jones and Jonathan Debt. So what if
maybe it needs a crossover? You need Indiana Jones.
I remember we were laughing the other night about
some
the images of him as Grindelwald.
Oh, God.
And we were like, what is that? It just looks so bad.
Well, he was in at least the first one of those. He might have been in the second one.
He
I
got
don't
kicked out
know.
after a while, though, because of all this. And then he's like, I got kicked off a film. It's like, oh man, because that movie was going to be so good.
Yeah.
You know.
Let's talk about movies that are good, though.
Yeah.
About that.
Well, one that is definitively good. The other, we're not so sure, but...
Yeah, but at least it tries its best, you know.
It's better than Jonathan Dett.
So...
Can you imagine Jonathan Dett in that role in Basic Instinct?
And
Douglas's role?
Douglas's... Oh, God. Well, back in the 90s, he was a halfway interesting actor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That would have been pre-Dead Man, so...
Yeah.
Walking down the street, Dead Man.
Here's the trailer
after Platoon.
for 1992's Hard Boiled. You didn't hear a lot of dialogue.
No, of course, we had
trailer.
another trailer that was mostly music and a lot of gunfights.
I imagine that played here in America, in key, more larger markets or cities, because that was how the movie would have been seen mostly. And it was like we're not even going to have another foreign language in this.
Guess what? Here's the movie.
Yeah.
Here's what it is. And it's like,
I mean, the shot that really gets me in the movie and in the trailer too is like the motorcycle that's midair, and then there's this shot and it just blows up into flame. Like,
I did really like the way that it did in the movie and in the trailer about when they're both pointing the guns at each other's necks. I think is a really good image of just like hatefulness.
Right, Levi, what's Hard Boiled about?
So Hard Boiled is a 1992 Hong Kong action thriller film directed by John Woo from a screenplay by Gordon Chan and Barry Wong. The film stars Chow Yun-fat as Inspector Tequila Yuen, Tony Leung Chiu-wai as Alan, an undercover cop, and Anthony Wong as Johnny Wong, a leader of the criminal triads. The film was John Woo's last Hong Kong film before his transition to Hollywood. After making films that glamorized gangsters and receiving criticism for doing so, Wu wanted to make a Dirty Harry-styled film to glamorize the police. That's an interesting way to put that, but okay. With the death of screenwriter Barry Wong, the film's screenplay underwent constant changes during filming. New characters such as Mad Dog and Mr. Wu were introduced. Now, Mad Dog was our favorite character in the movie, I'm guessing. Mr. Wu, which is literally John Woo in the movie. Like,
And, well, we'll talk about that later.
While the original plot line of a baby poisoning psychopath was cut. What? There is a lot of stuff in this movie, though, about babies that I'm like, why is there this much of this? But, yeah. Essentially, this came after his movies of Better Tomorrow and The Killer, which were really commercially successful in Hong Kong. I know A Better Tomorrow had its own kind of spate of sequels. That movie's pretty good, but it's not quite as good. The Killer I quite like. And then I think A Bullet in the Head was kind of, not a bullet to the head, but a bullet in the head was around this time too. But yeah, this was kind of his big send-off before coming to Hollywood and making stuff like Hard Target, Face Off, Paycheck, and Mission Impossible.
Paycheck,
2.
I've actually heard it's an okay movie. That's always made me laugh. It's like, Paycheck. Like, we're all taking paychecks for this one. But
essentially, this movie is more or less about a gun smuggler, basically leader of a triads, who is being investigated by Chow Yun-fat's character, Tequila,
a cop,
is his nickname, who's basically going after him, trying to find where they have all their guns at. Basically, it's in the bottom of a hospital, which is one of the more ridiculous things about this movie. But in the midst of all that, Tony Leung's character is this undercover cop who is actually with this other gang led by Uncle, what's his name? Uncle Hoy.
Uncle Junior? Oh.
Uncle Hoy, and then he kind of starts working with the Anthony Wong character, Johnny Wong, to kind of basically find out where they're hiding all their guns and everything. And it ultimately becomes about them eventually, of Chow Yun-fat and Tony Leung working together to take him down, and it's a
hijinks
big old shootout, basically. But we'll go through the cast quickly. Chow Yun-fat as Inspector Tequila Yuen Ho Yan, a clarinet playing alcoholic police. I never really got the sense that he was an alcoholic exactly, but I guess,
that might have been mentioned, but maybe that's why it's called Tequila too. I don't know, but that was not as big of a part of the movie as it.
Anyway, a clarinet playing alcoholic police sergeant with a reputation for defying his superiors and bending police rules. That's definitely true. He basically goes on a whole raid single-handed, by the way.
The one where he's like coming down from the roof.
Yes, that's literally not sanctioned whatsoever. Literally, they actually say, what's the chief going to say? He's like, don't worry about it, basically, and just like goes in there and
just blasts everybody
away. Yeah, but he had worked with John Woo, obviously, before with The Better Tomorrow, The Killer, and Once a Thief. He would later be in, I don't actually know what he's been in a while, though, but he would later be in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Had a small role, I remember, in the third Pirates movie.
Oh,
very
yeah.
small, barely in it.
Yeah, he's like part of the Pirate Confederacy stuff, I really like him as an action star. I mean, I haven't seen him in like a bunch of stuff, but everything I've seen him in, he's really good.
I would agree.
Sao Fang in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah. I think he's great as a lead for this.
Really good sense of humor.
Yeah.
He's really funny. Let me look and see what the latest thing he's been in, actually.
Was
Project Gutenberg.
Was he in that movie Bulletproof Monk? I feel like I saw trailers for that back in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yes. Monk with no name.
Yeah.
I saw a trailer for that here a while back, and I was like, there's no way this is a real movie. Like, it was just so insane. But yeah, he's been in a lot of different things, and he actually played Confucius in a movie.
He's probably one of the most recognizable film stars in the world when you really think about it, in terms of being a non-American, as far as how big these movies are, or the Hong Kong films are around the world.
But yeah, he's been in a lot of stuff, and he's always really good. Tony Leung, speaking of really good, as Alan, an undercover cop posing as a high-ranking triad assassin. He makes an origami crane every time he kills someone, a trait which was influenced by Woo's daughter when he saw her making them.
So that means John Woo was watching his daughter make
he was like,
paper cranes, and he said,
she kills my joy. What if, I don't know.
Or she brings me joy. What brings this character joy? Killing people. Oh, what if he made cranes every time he kills somebody? Which, in my memory, it's like, you should be making more cranes. Let me also say, and I love Tony Leung.
Yeah.
He's really memorable in...
a lot of Wong Kar-wai films.
And so he's great in general. I did, and again, this isn't exactly a problem because this movie has its own internal logic that you just go with after a point. But like the amount of bad stuff he's doing as an undercover cop, and he's just like, well, whatever. Like, just let him get away with that. I'm sometimes like, would that really be allowed?
Like there's the scene where he has the lighter and he puts it in the guy's pocket and then shoots him, and he falls in the water, and then he lives, but then he's later cut out of the movie. Let's say it. I think that cut out is a good way to say. But it's like the insanity of doing something like that. Obviously, it's ridiculous and it wouldn't work because there's no way, first of all, that you could shoot somebody that directly and it block it, but also that would blow right through that. I mean, but yeah, just the stuff he does is so bad. It's just like, But anyway, it also says he's shown as living alone on a yacht and considers himself to be asocial. Which, by the way, has its own Wikipedia page, which, dang it went away now. Hang on. Anyway, it says, Wu stated this was influenced by Alain Delon's character in Le Samurai. Leung probably worked with Wu on his film Bullet in the Head. I do remember that, which I haven't seen all of. But, hang on. There's this funny about this asocial. I got to read what that says when it comes up. I think they're both a really good... here we go. A lack of motivation to engage in social interaction. This is just a funny way to put that. But yeah, I think they're a really great co-lead role, both of them. I think that...
there's just both visually, but also in their characters, like how intense Tequila is in following through on his mission. And there's this almost like handsomely smug quality about Leung's character in this movie that he's like, well, if I really wanted to, I could just kind of abandon the police force and just join the triads if I really wanted to, and now he doesn't. But and that creates an interesting tension. One that I thought a lot about, I don't know, we didn't really mention The Departed while we were watching this, but there was an element of that, which of course that's a remake of the Hong Kong movies Infernal Affairs, which are a whole other thing. But I did think a little bit about that, the DiCaprio Damon divided, and that they are not allies at all in that movie, so that's something that's different, but it made me think about it.
But they're both really good and
great in counterpoints to each other.
It is really like, it does feel a lot like either that Damon DiCaprio or De Niro Pacino kind of but very organic, even for Americans who have seen their movies, but like it still feels very big, I think, and very fortunate that even happened. Teresa Mo is Teresa Chang, a fellow police officer's girlfriend. I'm going to go through these a little quicker. Helps to decode the secret code songs that are sent to the police by Alan, written on cards attached to bouquets he has delivered to her. That's all very complicated part of the story, is the way that he communicates with the police is through... the way that Leung communicates to the police is through Chow Yun-fat's girlfriend who works there for the police. She's like I said, technically a police officer, but she kind of is more of like a desk job thing. But that she's always like fa la ti do and all that stuff about like trying to decode it. And one of my favorite scenes is where the Philip Chan, who's the Superintendent Pang, who's the basically the chief of police. There's that scene where he's trying to read it out and she helps, and he's like, thank you, it's like in English, but it's weird. But she's good for what she is in it.
It is kind of a stock female.
She gets
character.
A lot more kind of at the end when she's helping take care of the babies when the hotel's gonna, the hospital is gonna blow up and she's having to get them out. And there's that great moment where she's like, "You're not gonna do this," and a guy slaps her and says "F and B" or something, and she literally unloads a whole clip into him. It's just like, wow, okay. Like, women can do this too. Like, you already knew that, but cool. Philip Chan, we mentioned prior to the film, he actually was a police officer. Before this, for like 15 years, the superintendent guy said he felt certain scenes in the film were very familiar, as they were similar to real police work. Wow.
What goes on in Hong Kong?
Does he dress up as doctors and show up in the hospital and be like, "I'm undercover doctor," or but he's really funny. I think he goes a fine line of being like funny, but also like, genuinely relatively heroic enough, but he's kind of a punchline throughout most of it, which is weird for a movie like this. But he's pretty funny. Our guy, Philip Kwok as Mad Dog, a skilled gunfighter and gang enforcer working for Johnny Wong. He literally looks like an action figure that you take out of the box, and he's like...
He feels like he could have easily been a background... like henchman in like a Lethal Weapon or a Die Hard movie, but he's like, he just looks really cool. He's like, and he's weird. He is a villain, a bad guy. But by the end, you do see that he does have his own set of ethics of like, this is too far.
Like, why are we going to kill all these innocent people?
This is too far. I'm not doing that. So he does have his own code of ethics, even though he's definitely like a psychopathic bad man.
No, he's crazy.
He almost looks like also like he could have easily been like in an X-Men comic in the early 90s. I mean, at various points. It looks like
he's in a Mortal Kombat movie or something.
So he's love him.
Yeah, he's great. I mean, he's one of those people we think about, great henchmen, and we think about him a lot because he doesn't talk a whole lot, but also the fact he's called Mad Dog, I just think it's hilarious because he's not that mad. He's just
not
insane.
Particularly.
Yeah, he's just always
maybe
people.
mad in the crazy sense.
Yes. Yeah. Anthony Wong is Johnny Wong, a scheming triad boss who plans to seize complete control of Hong Kong's gangs using his earnings from his gun smuggling business, most of which are stored in the basement of a hospital.
He's basically the Chinese John Larroquette.
He's a weird looking guy. He's such a very indelible, interesting image to just look at. He's and he has a lot of funny lines like towards the end when he's like got Leung hostage and he's like, "Say you're impotent." To Chow Yun Fat, and he's making him slap himself, and he's like, "On your knees, Jesus said," or something. Yeah. Just like, it's like really weird stuff. But yeah, he's a really good villain.
Easy to hate,
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen him in anything else. I'm gonna have to look. I know he was in a lot of Ringo. That's it. I know he's been in some Ringo Lamb movies. I think that I might have seen. He was in the Infernal Affairs movies. He was in Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. That's been so long since I saw that. I don't even remember that. Wait, what?
The Untold Story.
Looking at that, dang, I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, he's been in a lot of obviously other Hong Kong action movies. And wait, there's a movie called No Risk, No Gain: Casino Raiders, the sequel that he's in as Young Sing. So
wow,
Casino Raiders 2. I thought we already had Casino Raiders
had the sequel. I'm very confused.
Anyway, Fight Back to School 3. Look at that.
So we already fought back to school twice.
He was only in
the
third one. Yeah. The only other people I want to mention here is John Woo as bartender.
Mr.
Woo, a former cop who runs the jazz bar where tequila performs and offers him advice.
He's not in it much, but what I love is that he's very like, yes, let me give you some pearls of wisdom. It's just like, okay, and you're casting yourself as that. Okay,
it's so random.
Very Shyamalan-esque in that way.
Yeah, and it doesn't make a big deal about itself.
Yeah, it's not that big a deal.
Shyamalan's movies do. Yeah, but yeah.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about Hong Kong film because you know a little bit more about it than I would say.
Yeah.
Again, we talked about Briar Summer Day last time. Taiwanese film was not quite on as much on the map.
We talked a little bit about that last time, as far as Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, though, Hong Kong has created a whole variety of types of genres, but it's most explicitly known for its action films or
kung fu action
films.
Movies. Yeah.
So now those Shaw Brothers movies you've seen some of, those were from Hong Kong,
yes.
right? Mm-hmm. What to you about Hong Kong makes it kind of special or unique within not only international cinema, but particularly with Asian cinemas?
Well, obviously with Japan, you have samurai cinema and kaiju cinema, which has its own versions,
as well as a whole bedrock of dramas that have been around too,
and the Ozu movies, and anime is its own thing too. But that's kind of after this away.
I think unambiguously Japan has the biggest film culture, not only within itself, within its own borders, but also what it's produced and went around the world. I think. Yeah, I mean internationally, but Hong Kong's not that far behind in terms of its impact.
Yeah, but as far as Hong Kong movies go, I mean, I think the thing about that too is you have all these action movies, and that's the main thing. Is you have like I said, the Shaw Brothers movies, which the ones I've seen are good enough as movies, and then they get to the climax, and it's like, wow, really good kung fu action. But as far as the action movies go, I really love those and kind of prefer those. And there's been stuff like the raid movies, which come from Indonesia.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of movies that
also influenced by Hong Kong too.
Yeah. And Korea has some, and Japan even too. Battle Royale is even a version of that in its own way, which I know that's been on, like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that those action movies especially have influenced Western art or movies, meaning America and Europe, as much as the samurai movies have in a lot of ways too, which is interesting. But I don't feel, a lot of people criticize Kurosawa in Japan for making movies that were too Western, as in too Americanized. I really do feel like the Hong Kong movies still really maintain themselves as that, as being themselves, and are more influential than they are influenced by other things, I think.
A lot of them still do have this classic gunfighter divide in scenarios that seem like they do at least partially are inspired from American westerns, or even what later was Japanese movies too.
Right. So, but also Hong Kong cinema has, and we talked about this last week as well, like Wong Kar-wai and a lot of these great dramas, which some of his movies still very much fall into the crime genre of stuff like Fallen Angels, which I haven't seen yet, but or even aspects of Chungking Express. But it just is a very diverse film culture that is really only, like I said, I think rivaled by Japan or South Korea of being as far as Asian cinema goes.
And like with culturally, I feel like it lives in a strange shadow with China, and as does Hong Kong in general.
And it's also English influenced, of course, because of Britain being there for so long, and But.
I mean, let me just say, I always liked this movie quite a bit. Seeing it again, it kind of blew me away all over again. As one of not only the great action movies of its era, but in any era. I mean, it really just blew me away in terms of its vision, its choreography, of course. Doesn't have the most dense story in the world, but again, a lot of it is quite good, and again, a lot of it feasts on Fat and Leung's presences and their opposition, but also support of one another, and that's just an interesting wrinkle to add to all this. Again, John Woo was one of the big breakthroughs of Hong Kong cinema, and he of course came to America and made some action movies there, and he's still making movies actively. You don't really hear about him.
I think he made one a few years ago, but not as much. And of course, you had others like Ringo Lam and Johnny To, who's a big one. But he's kind of the one that I've seen the most of, and I think is the best. And what I think most Americans agree is kind of the best. I know he co-directed that movie that I saw. I can't remember the name of it now. It was one of those because he kind of came out of that Shaw Brothers Studios tradition and co-directed some movies, assistant directed. The boxer from Shangtung, I think, is the one I was thinking of. He was a big Chang Che fan and worked under Chang Che a lot, who made a lot of those movies, like Five Deadly Venoms, Five Shaolin Masters, Five Element. He made a lot of like number movies, it looks like. So, of course, one of my favorite titles, The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. But which is technically kind of a Hammer adjacent movie,
really,
I think, because it had like Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing in it, I think. Or no, it just had Peter Cushing. It didn't have Christopher Lee, but that's like basically a Chinese vampire movie, which is weird.
Sounds interesting.
But so there were a lot, but Wu, I think, was so successful mainly just because of the action of his movies. Was just so different. I mean, anything gets shot, it explodes. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just, which is obviously ridiculous. But
I mean, that's the thing. Some of the inconsistencies in quotes of like the logic of the movie to me are explained by it having its own logic in terms of just we're not really living in a quote realistic world.
Yeah.
Which again, there's usually a suspension of disbelief with action movies, anyways. But particularly with this one, where everything's so operatic, everything's so extreme, where
There's
the
slow motion.
a gun itself is almost just like a fist balled up. It's
Right.
like, it's just like I'm just going to point a gun at your face, and it's like not that big a deal really right now, but I'm just going to keep it here just because that's the
and also
conventions
there's no way to
of this.
they rarely reload. It's just a constant barrage. It doesn't matter. Like I mean, especially whenever Chow Yun-fat is shooting a gun. It's like there's like one of the most unrealistic moments of the movie is him loading that shotgun before the raid's gonna happen. It's like no, because these don't need to be reloaded. What are you talking about? Like or when that happens to Mad Dog before his death, he like runs out and he's like mad and throws the gun down and he's like what, like basically, and then gets blasted away. But I mean, and it's not one of those movies that has one really good action sequence. It's like has multiple throughout. I mean, it's pretty consistent because it has the main ones. Obviously, are the tea house at the beginning of the movie, which is a great opening. The warehouse, which is a big one, and
kind
then
of in the middle,
right? And then there's the stuff at the boat, which is kind of a brief sequence, but and then the big stuff is the ending with the hospital, which is just an all-out barrage. And it really is, I think, a testament to how great the movie is that you have that much action in one movie is pretty crazy for it to be that much.
And it's not necessarily an American-made action movie. That it's not like Terminator 2 in terms of like the budget. It would obviously have, and still it does so much with what relatively small amount it has. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, I know within the Hong Kong world, this would have been like the A++ budgeted movie, you know. But I mean, objectively speaking, not the biggest budget in the world, and yet Wu.
But strangely, like I said, this movie did not make quite as much money as some of his other movies in Hong Kong, which I think is insane. It's like, what were y'all doing?
It seems like especially considering where he was going to go the next few years to America
and the
Beyond,
stars too.
The movie that would have been the big, huge hit, which is strange.
I think it was bigger in America. It seemed like maybe than here. I don't know, but. I guess because we're just a bunch of sickos over here. We're like, It's like,
we're
it's like that
balance.
meme. It's like that meme of sickos looking through. Ha ha, yes, like
and speaking of, how does this compare to you to other '90s action movies in America and beyond? Because I think of, there are great action movies in any era. I feel like the '90s, maybe it's partly nostalgia, but had a lot of really great high quality ones, and that was coming out of an '80s that had produced something like Die Hard in the very late '80s. But I mean, I think this stands toe-to-toe with most of anything that was being made in America, I mean, being as great as it is. I mean, Terminator 2, of course, I think is the pinnacle.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Terminator 2 just slightly has it beat, only because there is so much action in Hard Boiled that I wouldn't say that the mind begins to shut down exactly, but it's so much that you're just kind of like, I wouldn't even say you're bored, because I'm never bored, but Terminator 2 also just has a great story and is about a lot
big
of things,
ideas,
but I think it has more variety of its action sequences too, because like there are different. Oh, you remember this scene and that scene? It's like in this, you think more about you think it's like Howard Dean. You think more about specific moments than you do entire scenes because there's just so much going on. Like I think about you could name things in this movie like. The part in the warehouse where a motorcycle's going through there and he shoots it with a shotgun and it bursts into flames, like stuff like that. Or like one of my favorite kind of moments in the movie, it's like incredibly violent and weird and morbid, but there's the part where Chow Yun-fat's holding the baby and he's like singing it a lullaby and there's all these people that are coming in. And he's like singing, and then he'll point the gun and just blast somebody, and blood's everywhere, and it's just like so. And then there's this, the little lullaby music comes back, and it's like, and like stuff like that. That's just very strange. I think is more memorable in moments and bits and pieces than it is for whole scenes. But I think the construction of Cameron's action is overall better as like a whole cinematic experience, I think.
Yeah.
But
Just looking at lists of some other 90s action movies. Another one that comes to mind, too, that is way up there is Speed.
Yeah.
You know, as far as...
and I saw that some of the Rodriguez movies of Desperado, Once Upon a Time in Mexico, and some of those.
Yeah, and then obviously the first Mission Impossible movie.
Right.
Obviously come out there. And the return of the James Bond movies also.
Yeah.
With those.
Yeah, GoldenEye is one of the best action movies of that decade, too, I think. Total Recall, that's funny. Men in Black.
Men in Black is, you know, that I think is really great. That also, I think more so almost as a sci-fi comedy more than even as explicitly as an action movie. I do think...
The Matrix, too.
The Matrix is probably, to me, the second best of the decade after Terminator 2.
Yeah.
I'd say this is probably like 3 or 4 somewhere in there. And that was another movie that by the late 90s, I feel like Hong Kong action films, even in a slightly mainstream way, had been a little bit more seen. Because that obviously wears its influences on its sleeve as well, as far as being, you know, inspired by Hong Kong, as well as anime and comic books and a whole host of
video games.
All kinds of things.
Yeah.
And to that point, what are some signature scenes or moments from this movie? You pointed out some earlier, but some that you really stick with you. I think, again, that whole sequence I think about a lot is with the whole, I'm going to sing this baby a lullaby while I'm gunning all these people
and
down.
there's that part.
And you're kind of like laughing, and you're like, this is dangerous, though. Like,
but
he does have ear protection there for the child.
But there's the part, he's like, don't look, X-rated action, or whatever. Yeah. He's like got the gun over his face, basically. There's that part, though, in the middle of that where there's a guy that gets, he's like trying to come through a door and he smashes it and the guy's face smashes through it.
Oh, right.
And then he like blasts him through the door and you see like this weird like side shot of the bullet going through the body, and it's just like, this is just so violent. It's just like, this is too much. And that's what I think pointing to it in the movie almost is like, yeah, this is bad. Like, you know, this is like that there's a baby here. I do think a lot though also about it just left me. Oh, well, of course, there's the kind of the best, I think, kind of little sequence in the movie is that kind of long take. It's kind of the part a lot of people talk about where they are going down some hallways and then they go up an elevator and they're just shooting on everybody, and it's just a big kind of probably about 3-minute take. But that literally, I don't remember if I mentioned this last week or not, but that literally in that there's some moments of slow motion that are literally only used for the audience to calm down and get a breath, because it's literally so much shooting going on.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, and then I mentioned there's just some different dialogue things that are really funny. Like I said, I think Chow Yun-fat's just hilarious. So pretty much any time he's on screen, he's what I'm looking at. Just the whole idea that there is a massive armory below a hospital. It's like, what? Like, how is that even possible? I don't know.
There are elements and moments in this movie while police are ostensibly involved in the action, like with Chow Yun-fat or Tony Leung in a undercover capacity.
Yeah.
It does feel like sometimes it's like running riot in the city with no supervision or anybody stepping in, almost like a Batman movie of this era too. Is some of these superhero movies?
It's very like vigilante. But he is a cop, but like it feels. But he's going against their orders too and doing stuff. So
and that they're only there to pick up the mess, whatever's left.
There's that part where he's arguing with the inspector and he's like, "You don't act like this. Here's the John." Okay. Like, he literally says, okay, but he's like, "There's the John." He says in Cantonese or whatever, but like,
his detective mode, by the way, too, when he's in the library.
Oh, yeah, and he's like, okay, that is so dumb. That whole scene actually is pretty stupid where, like, it's this whole little, like, montage sequence of, like, Tony Leung driving in a sports car and walking in with sunglasses. He goes to a library.
Yeah.
And then when he takes the sunglasses off, the music just stops. And it's like, but he sits down and is talking to this guy, and he has a book, and he opens the book, and there's a gun in it with a silencer, and he shoots him, and then he puts it back
Tony
in.
Leung's character.
Shoots him, and he puts it back in, and he walks it back and puts it on the shelf. But and then, like, he comes in and he's eating like a fillet of fish sandwich,
from McDonald's.
like Chow Yun-fat, and he's looking, and he takes another book, and he's like, a book was here.
Yeah.
And then he's like walking.
But then there's these
looking.
flashes of,
Right,
like,
of, like,
his intuition
him
telling
doing
him
it earlier. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, what?
clearly
Yeah.
detective mode.
I think one of the great moments in the movie, though, too, I meant to mention was that part at the beginning where he's like making the tequila drink and it fizzes and he slams it down on the bar and then it says hard boiled. And it's
Yeah.
just like, oh, yeah, like, basically. But, yeah, I mean, the whole movie is a walking, like, just awesomeness.
Yeah.
It's just everything about it is it's what some people call awesome sauce,
Yeah.
like, as they would say. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those movies. There's not a whole lot to say about other than because we could just sit here and just talk about this moment, that moment. But,
Yeah. I mean, again, it's one of those that if you're into action cinema at all, you probably already are vaguely aware of it, or at least Chow Yun-fat or John Woo's names. But immediately just grabs you by the throat and stays there the whole time. And again,
because even some of the
and again,
more,
it's one of the movies that I've always liked quite a bit. But seeing it this time, I was like, man, this is really great. This is even greater than I remembered it to be. So.
Yeah, I know there was a video game adaptation called Stranglehold in the late 2000s that I always wanted to play but never have, and I'm thinking, oh, this is a video game would be great, but I've never played it. I know that there's, and also I was going to say, you ever notice in any video game, if it's like an action game, it's like it's in Hong Kong or it's in Shanghai or it's because of obviously movies like this where it's like that's where all the action is literally, and it's like
X-rated action,
X-rated action, Also, one of the other great moments is when he's got the baby and him and Tony Leung are talking, they're arguing, he's like, you need to go or whatever, and all this fire comes up in between them or something, and Tony Leung just looks at him and nods and's like basically goodbye, and he's going to go I think he's going to go try to get the bad guy, and he's running away and he just yells, Moo-ya! Which means bull S in Cantonese, but he's like, Moo-ya! Like, that's a great moment, but yeah. Oh, and then also another funny moment is when he's gonna like Chow Yun-fat's gonna jump out the window, and his leg catches on fire, and he's trying to jump, and the baby literally pees himself, and pees on the fire and puts it down. And he's like, "You little piss pot" or whatever. But yeah, so I mean, it's literally one of the most entertaining movies I've ever seen, just all the way around. So
that's Hard Boiled. We watched a Blu-ray version of it. I guess it was, I don't know what label put it out.
Dragon Dynasty is the name of it, which I think puts out a lot of, first of all, John Woo movies, and then also just other, I think, action movies. You know, a random thing we talked about, if you watch this Blu-ray, at the very bottom left, there's this random gray line that goes across the screen. Just at the bottom left. It doesn't go, it's like an inch. It ain't that much. But it just sits there, and it looks like it's supposed to be like a menu that pops up or something, but nothing ever happens, and it's why is this?
Fixated on early on, and then kind of had forgotten about it, but then
I was like, hey, check in on the gray line over there.
And
like,
it was still there,
Yeah, but like we said, I don't know why they haven't, which I know this originally was a Criterion Collection DVD years ago. I don't know if they're ever going to redo that. Probably not, but it'd be nice if they do a 4K at some point.
I could see that
because it looks good, but you can tell it could use a good restoration. I think too, but I don't know.
So that's Hard Boiled from 1992. Another movie from 1992. Speaking of X-rated action,
definitely
not quite X-rated.
Somehow, in some ways, a more violent movie in certain parts than this.
Definitely more emotionally violent, that's for sure. Is the trailer for Basic Instinct.
We got 31 stab wounds.
What was it?
Ice pick.
I'd like to speak to Miss Catherine Trammell, please.
Is she a suspect?
She's a suspect.
I wanted to write a book about the murder of a retired rock and roll star.
You know how she does the boyfriend? With an ice pick.
She intended the book to be her alibi. I picked him up, and I had sex with him.
You didn't feel anything for him, you just had sex with him for your book.
In the beginning. Then I got to like what he did for me.
You like playing games, don't you?
It's nice.
You've got no physical evidence.
She's lying. What's your new book about?
A detective. He falls for the wrong woman.
What happens?
She kills him.
Stay away from her.
You are out of control, Curran.
You won't learn anything I don't want you to know.
She knew I'd say she did it, and she knew that nobody would buy it.
She is screwing with your head, Nick.
She knows things about me that I only told you.
How does it feel to kill someone?
You tell me.
I think you got too close to the flame. Nikki liked it. You're in over your head. She seduces people.
It was internal affairs, wasn't it?
She manipulates people.
Freeze! How much did she pay you?
You wanna play her? Come on!
She knows where I live and breathe.
Games are over, Nick.
You like playing games, don't you?
So we've been quoting that nonstop, and it was actually in the trailer. So you just heard Michael Douglas say that. Basic Instinct. I'll give us a little bit of give you a little bit of a download on that.
Download,
whatever. From 1992.
More like a carbo load.
Neo-noir erotic thriller, directed by Paul Verhoeven and written by Joe Esterhaus. The film follows San Francisco police detective Nick Curran, played by Michael Douglas, as he investigates the brutal murder of a wealthy rock star. During the course,
rock star is dead. Yeah.
Sorry. During the course of the investigation, becomes entangled in a passionate and intense relationship with Catherine Tramiel, played by Sharon Stone, an enigmatic writer and the prime suspect. Just a little further down, it says initially it was mixed reviews when it came out. Performances, original score, editing were praised, while its writing and character development were criticized. It was very controversial for a whole host of reasons. It says here due to sexually explicit content, specifically the whole scene where Sharon Stone crosses or uncrosses her legs. That was like, oh my, one of the big '90s movie moments. So I think that's important we recognize that. Violence and depiction of homosexual relationships. This is what's most shocking, I think, about the whole experience. Despite the public protest, Basic Instinct was a commercial success, grossing $352 million worldwide and becoming the fourth highest-grossing film of 1992.
Yeah,
can you imagine a movie like this being made today even? That was the fourth highest-grossing movie?
I know it had a really kind of random spate of sequels that...
Basic Instinct 2, came out in 2006.
But,
Sharon Stone was in it.
Yeah, but... Michael Douglas wasn't. So there's only one? I thought there were more than one.
There's at least one.
It's like, you ever notice how many Howling sequels there are? There's like 5 of them or something.
Let me just add this real quick. Since its release, the film has undergone a critical reevaluation and has become recognized for its groundbreaking depiction of sexuality. Mainstream Hollywood cinema, described by one scholar as, quote, a neo-film noir masterpiece that plays with and transgresses the narrative rules of film noir. And again, just to talk about what's... let's just talk about what the top 10 highest-grossing movies of, say, 1992 were. Let's start from 10 going up to 1. Wayne's World, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Sister Act, A Few Good Men. Batman Returns was actually 6th highest-grossing movie of 1992. That's quite shocking.
What it was for 1989? Was it number 1?
It was number 1 by a wide margin.
Okay,
yeah.
I couldn't remember. I wasn't sure.
But so the sequel to that was number 6. That's just crazy. Yeah. Lethal Weapon 3, Basic Instinct. So Basic Instinct made more money than Batman Returns. That's crazy. Home Alone
Especially
2
that
lost
being
to New York.
release too. Batman Returns. That's interesting.
Home Alone 2 lost to New York, number 3. Home Alone 1 was a
also
huge
that
movie.
was released at Christmas, so that always makes money.
The Bodyguard, number 2, and then Aladdin, number 1.
Yeah.
So I'm just very much shocked that Basic Instinct was that successful.
Yeah, that's something else. I didn't know it made that much money. I knew it did, but yeah, I mean, you think about the erotic thrillers. This is kind of the main one that people talk about. But where do you want to start here? You want to talk about?
Well, let's go through
plot, or
let's talk about the casting crew real quick.
Right.
So this is directed by Paul Verhoeven, who, was one of the big directors of the 80s and 90s.
RoboCop.
RoboCop was one of his bigger ones. Yeah. Total Recall came out in 90s. Starship Troopers, that was a little later.
Showgirls later on. Hollow Man, that's kind of a movie people talk about.
When Paul Verhoeven's name first comes up, what's some of the first things you think of? Not even in terms of movies, but in terms of style, in terms of what he represents for film.
He's very much like a Hitchcock-esque figure. I usually think of movies. He and Joel Schumacher, I kind of think of in similar regards.
They both made movies that were him more so than Schumacher, but like the sexuality of them were more in focus and more in front and center.
Yeah, right. And so I usually think of the sex and the violence of his movies are like extreme. There's some stuff in RoboCop that's some of the most violent stuff I've ever seen. It's just like wow. And then, of course, he made movies before that in the Netherlands, which I haven't seen. But, yeah, normally I think of a certain...
most of his things, too, have a satirical bent to them.
Yeah.
Most explicitly, I think, with RoboCop or Starship Troopers, and Total Recall, too. But, in this movie has a lot of different genres it's working in. It is a light satire in a certain sense. I do also, maybe the next place to go with this, I do think this movie is very explicitly a neo-noir movie. And having just finished The Black Dahlia by James Ellroy recently, which I love the book of, I've not seen the movie. I've been thinking a lot about noir and neo-noir recently. And I think one big thing about neo-noir, which was huge in the 80s and in the 90s, and is still in a roundabout way being done today, in its own way, Hypnotic was a neo-noir.
Yeah.
Is it finally makes explicit a sexuality that original noir films of the 40s and 50s was more below the surface. Obviously, it was the era of the production code, so you can only get away with so much.
Stuff like Gilda you're talking about, or
even The Postman Always Rings Twice. Yeah. Vertigo, is the pinnacle. But again, the sexuality of those movies was there, but you don't quite totally see it. It's kind of hidden in shadow, literally and figuratively. These movies, and again, not every erotic thriller was exactly a neo-noir. A lot of them do. A lot of the things that, say, somebody like Brian De Palma was making, was
in the 80s,
Body Double or
Dress to Kill.
Dress to Kill would fit into that. And so that, I know your taste on noir is sometimes you like, sometimes you don't, I know. But that is one thing I do find admirable about the erotic thriller as it relates to neo-noir, is that it was an attempt to make more explicit sometimes the sexual tension of those
Body
movies.
Heat was another movie. Yeah.
What do you think of Basic Instinct as fitting within either of those spaces in terms of a neo-noir or erotic thriller and what it represents for either one of those?
I think one of the better erotic thrillers, actually, is Fatal Attraction. I think is pretty good.
Which also stars Michael Douglas, who in many ways was one of the key figures in a lot of these
they
movies.
Just made a remake show of that
on Paramount Plus.
It's been a whole thing, and I'm like, okay. Yeah. There are actual sequences, though, in Fatal Attraction I think are really great sequence. This is a really good thriller sequence. I love a lot of things about Basic Instinct, but I'm rarely wowed by its thriller aspects.
Yeah.
I think it's very predictable in a lot of ways, but also we'll talk about the goofy plot of this movie is insane. We'll talk about that later. But I think that as a neo-noir, I think that's interesting. I don't normally think of it as that, even though it definitely is. But I think as that, like you said, actualizing that sexuality and violence very explicitly. I haven't seen another movie do it this directly. And I'm just thinking, and I know people say this stuff, they literally don't make movies like this anymore. People talk all the time about the sex scene discourse and all that. They really don't make movies that have sex scenes anymore. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't really have an opinion on that exactly. But the 90s, I think, with the explosion of, first of all, premium cable television.
Also, independent films.
Independent films, just pornography in general. And just a willingness to make movies like that. I think, because in the 80s, I think it was a lot more about, it's weird, I think it was movies that had sex and violence, but rarely did they connect in a way this explicit.
Well, I think there was even a tendency in the 80s to moralize a little more sometimes. When you think about even the Cronenberg movies of the 80s, like that, there was like a, while they were sexually transgressive, there was still this slightly judgmental quality about them. With this, I feel like the whole movie's pretty amoral in terms of...
Yeah, it's very Bret Easton Ellis in that way, as far as just being very detached and not really attaching a lot of morality to the events. It's more about just like, these are the things that happen.
Really, if it feels good, do it, basically, is the...
Right,
you know, the
which is not anything I agree with, but it's an interesting...
I mean, I do think you can point alone to the success of Boogie Nights and say that was an era where pornography or sexuality was seen like in a more I don't know if liberating lens is exactly
even
how
more
I
than
say
it was in
like,
the 60s and 70s.
That you know, a celebration almost of a world like the porn world, which is what Boogie Nights in its own way was, you know.
Right.
And again, we said his name earlier. We'll go through the cast here. Michael Douglas as Detective Nick. Again, say his last name. Curran, yeah. All right, Levi, give us your take on Michael Douglas.
I love Michael Douglas. He's one of my favorite actors.
I do too.
Genuinely and not genuinely. Yeah. I think he is both good and awful.
Like, what's some of your favorite Michael Douglas movies or performances?
This, I think, is my favorite performance from him. My favorite of his movies is probably The Game. What I like about that, though, is it's this character buried down even further into this whole veneer of a respectability Wall Street banker type who's like very like emotionless and kind of doesn't care about anybody or anything, but actually does, but kind of buries that beneath all, you know, all this grief he has, but has these explosive moments of freaking out. But this movie's just full ham all the time. I love it. I mean, genuinely, and like, oh my god, this is like bad kind of, you know. But I think that I remember when I'll go ahead and tell the story when I first saw this movie. I saw this movie the day I graduated from high school. Literally, I went that morning to do graduation practice. Went home, came back that evening. In the middle of that, I watched Basic Instinct. I'm literally sitting there during the graduation, which is its own whole life event, just thinking about this movie literally the whole time, just like, what the hell did I just see? Just the violence, and especially him, just the acting. I think I once described this movie, I'll read it, as my review of it on Letterboxd. I said, I said, Basic Instinct continues to baffle. Even 27 years later, its boilerplate plot that seems right on track goes off the rails, flips 6 or 7 times, then spontaneously combusts with enough power to be seen and heard for miles or decades. Like that proverbial train wreck, I couldn't look away, especially not from Douglas and Stone, whose shine is the perfectly pitched, trashy highlight in an already crass and ugly erotic thriller whose controversies continue to reverberate. In other words, I still love it, y'all. But he is just total ham the whole time. She is very much her persona. I feel like it's a more calm, cool, and collected version of what she would do in Casino. That's a very kind of desperate version of her persona. In this, though, she's in control of every situation. Yeah. He is not. He's totally out of control.
And he's weirdly, maybe not at first, but as the narrative goes on, almost becoming more and more at ease with that. Yeah. And like that, he's kind of loving, kind of going sideways.
He doesn't really care about the fact that he is smoking again, he is drinking again. He doesn't ever do cocaine in the movie, I don't think. Exactly.
And it talks about maybe he used to.
He used to, but I'm saying in the movie he doesn't, I don't think, which is the one thing he never goes full into. But it seems like he always is on cocaine, though. Yeah. Like, you know, it's kind of like what we said about Al Pacino in Heat, how it had been written originally that he was on cocaine, but then wasn't. They took that out of the movie.
But then he still acted.
Right.
And he's admitted that as much since, yeah.
But, people talk a lot about, like, Al Pacino in Scarface or Heat as, like, this totally over the top. I think Michael Douglas is that way in a lot of things, but especially this is just... And it's interesting to see him as a weird sex symbol of the time, because he's a handsome guy.
Yeah.
But...
He's always moody, temperamental, out of control. Like, it is very strange.
Why would a woman be interested in someone like that? I don't know. That's an interesting.
I've only more recently seen Romance in the Stone, and liked that movie fine enough. Although it did feel like Raiders of the Lost Ark also ran from the 80s.
Well, the other Indiana Jones movies do too, so it's all right.
Wall Street obviously is the thing that probably a lot of people associate him with, and I've recently rewatched that, and the movie itself remains whatever, but he's pretty good in it. I think. I think he won an Academy Award for that. And we also are weirdly fans of Wall Street Money Never Sleeps, the sequel.
I actually definitively like that better than the first one. So
War of the Roses is a movie it's been a little while since I've seen, but he's also unhinged in that. And he randomly is really good with Kathleen Turner. There's a whole period where she was also in the Romance in the Stone movie. I've not seen Jewel of the Nile, which they were also both in. But Danny DeVito, who is a really great dark comic director anyways, does a really good job with War of the Roses. Falling Down's a movie that neither one of us have still not seen that.
Not all of it. I've seen parts of it,
Not seen that.
It's that movie where he freaks out because he can't get a breakfast. It's like it's too late for breakfast at a restaurant, which that's not even really a thing now. I mean, you can go anywhere and get breakfast, but...
The Game, again, I also quite love. That's one of my favorites from him. Yeah. Traffic, we didn't really mention that in this podcast.
That's a really good performance, I think, too, of just... There's that one scene... He's a little more low-key in that.
Yeah.
But there's that one scene where he's, like, driving... his wife's driving him home, and she's like, all you ever do when you're home is drink. He's like, I have one drink to take the edge off. Like, it sounds almost like Nicholson, but he's like, otherwise I die of boredom. I actually do think I want to talk about The Game a little bit, because The Game is one of my favorite movies in general. I think he's really good in that, of like being genuinely good, and also very, like I said, he starts as this very like manicured and calm and very like specific and very angry.
His brother is Sean Penn,
right?
So I weirdly wish we had a movie that we had more of them in scenes together, but
but that over the time of the movie, he's just constantly spiraling out of control, and just becomes more and more and you realize that's who that person really is. But one thing I'll say, one of my favorite scenes in Traffic is where he's going to look for his daughter who's staying with that drug dealer. And he goes knocking on the door, and he's like, have you seen my daughter? Or whatever. And he's like, give me just a second. And then he's like, who the F do you think you are coming around here? And he's like, pushing him around, and he's like, please, just help me. And it's just like, and then there's that part where he's driving down the street before that, and he's like looking out the window, and there's this like, black guy out in the street that's like, hey, what are you doing, man? And he like looks away, and then the camera zooms on his eyes, and he's got sunglasses on, and it's just funny. But that's an interesting movie as far as his whole performance in that is very particular, of being like, it's almost like, why is Michael Douglas in this movie? It just feels kind of random, but I mean, that movie's great and I love it, but it's just...
I've always heard, I really love the book Wonder Boys. I've heard he's really good in it, and the movie's good. I've not seen it yet.
Sadly, here more recently, he's just been in a lot of these Marvel movies, and that's kind of all he does now.
Yeah.
But then again, I mean, I don't know. He's done enough things to forgive himself, I guess.
So we're big fans of Michael Douglas here. Sharon Stone as Catherine Tremell. She's essentially the villain of the movie. There's a lot to say about her in this movie. Obviously, again, her sexuality is a big part of the movie in terms of the whole moment of, again, her crossing her legs. That was a big moment in the 90s that I've heard people talk.
Buttons, they say.
In movies.
Can't imagine pausing something to look at on a VHS now. But
this is her best performance. I think that she does a really great job with a character that is not always the most in-depth on the page. I feel like sometimes it's so much of a cipher that another actress could have taken this and not done nearly as much with it as she does, but
Yeah.
this perfectly is fit and tailored to her. Let me just ask this about the character, and then maybe give your thoughts about Sharon Stone or her performance in this in general. Is there ever really any doubt in your mind watching this, either for the first time or even on a repeat viewing if you haven't seen it in a while, that she is the killer the whole time? Is there ever any serious doubt about that to you? There was not to me.
And
that's not a problem
No.
even necessarily,
No.
but I'm just...
No, I mean, you see her name at the beginning of the movie. You see the woman at the beginning of the movie, who, by the way, I'm still not certain exactly who that was, even though it was her more than likely, but I really don't know.
Yeah.
But we were talking about that, how the movie wraps itself up by the end, and it was actually this person who did it all. But then it's like that
And the final moment
is like, wait, what? Like,
well, even before that, I was like, well, she just framed that whole other woman and
right.
made her go down, and that's what it was, you know.
But what I do think is interesting, no matter what, is that with the movie, it feels like no matter who did what, all of these people are psychopaths, basically.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just like, it's just psychopathic
except
limits.
Gus,
who can be the worst. Yeah. But, oh, man! But yeah, like literally everybody is a psychopath in this. So yeah, but I mean, yeah, there's no doubt.
Again, I don't think that's necessarily a problem.
No.
I'm just saying
but the movie tries to play with that though, and it's like, but I am actually like, yeah, I literally don't know by the end, but it says it's her, but then I'm like, so then what was the whole climax? I don't know. Yeah,
I just assumed that she set her up the whole way.
Right.
You know, what do you think of this character and Sharon Stone in general? Like in this,
I like Sharon Stone. She's somebody I used to really not like based on her casino performance. I'm just like, this character is so annoying. I can't stand her.
Yeah.
But I kind of used to feel that way about Faye Dunaway too. Seeing Network.
Don't ask Betty Davis about Faye Dunaway.
Well, we were laughing about that earlier.
Yeah.
Totally unprofessional. And I'm still not the craziest fan of both of those actresses, especially with some other, actresses of their eras that I think are better than them. But yeah, I mean, I think she's good. I think this is just an iconic performance that is really, you can't look away. I mean, it's. I
don't know if she got nominated for an Academy Award for this. I think she would have deserved a nomination at least.
Yeah. She is probably the best thing about the movie, objectively, I think, that...
She did not, actually. I'm looking here. The film was nominated for Best Film Editing and Best Original Score. But
score. That's funny. But yeah, I think she is really good. Even though I'm still not, like, crazy about her in general, but she is good. In this, especially.
Yeah. Well, Michael Douglas was nominated for Worst Actor by Golden Raspberry Awards. So,
okay,
just know that.
Whatever.
But he was nominated for an MTV Movie Award for Best Male Performance. It's hard to believe the MTV generation getting excited for a movie like this.
Best Kiss or anything.
Let's see. Best Movie, Best Male Performance, one Best Female Performance for Sharon Stone, one Most Desirable Female. Also, that was a category. Best Villain also. She won Most Desirable Female. I say in quotes, Most Desirable Female and Best Female Performance. Best On-Screen Duo didn't win. That was the 1993 MTV Movie Awards. Let's just look at that real quick and see what all was nominated. All right, Best Movie. A Few Good Men won.
Okay.
Over Aladdin, Basic Instinct, The Bodyguard, and Malcolm X. I'm shocked Malcolm X was even on that list. Okay. Best Male Performance, Denzel Washington won for Malcolm X. Some other nominees, Kevin Costner for The Bodyguard, Tom Cruise, A Few Good Men. You know what? From here on out, I think we need to look at every year of the MTV Movie Awards as we go through every year.
Yeah, we might as well.
Won. Yeah. Michael Douglas, Basic Instinct, was nominated, as well as Jack Nicholson for A Few Good Men.
This is ridiculous. When he didn't win, I guess.
There was a Most Desirable Male, so we'll give them credit with that at least. Christian Slater for Untamed Heart won. I didn't know there was ever a time where Christian Slater was all that desirable, but okay.
Yeah.
Kevin Costner for The Bodyguard, Tom Cruise, A Few Good Men, Mel Gibson, Lethal Weapon 3, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Nowhere to Run.
You want to hear me try to do my impression of Christian Slater in True Romance? I've never done it before, but are you ready?
Sure.
I think that you ought to give me this money and let me do what I want. I don't know. That ain't that great. Yeah, Christian Slater, he's a good actor, but most desirable man. That's funny. That's a joke
This is an interesting category. Breakthrough performance. Marissa Tomei won for
My Cousin.
She won an Oscar for that, I think, too. Best Supporting Actress.
What's a grit?
Halle Berry for Boomerang, Whitney Houston, The Bodyguard, Kathy Najimy for Sister Act, and Rosie O'Donnell, League of Their Own. One thing I just want to say about that, it's actually interesting that most of those people ended up turning out to be names. You know what I mean? Because sometimes with breakthrough performances, sometimes they just don't have bigger careers after that. But
it's like getting a rookie card. It's like you never know.
Best villain that year. Jennifer Jason Leigh won for Single White Female, which I've always heard is good, but I've
who directed that?
Not seen. Barbara Schroeder.
Oh yeah, Barbette Schroeder. Yeah.
Danny DeVito, Batman Returns was nominated. Ray Liotta, Unlawful Entry. It's amazing the movies that just you don't really know about all that much.
I've seen that poster before, but I've never seen the movie.
Jack Nicholson, A Few Good Men, that should have won. Yeah. Sharon Stone or Sharon Stone for Basic Instinct.
I think. This is ridiculous. You imagine them going after each other. Oh my God.
That needs to be the spinoff. Like they both end up in prison, men's and women's prison.
And it's like, whatever you're doing, stop it. Right? Kind of thing. Maybe he takes her to a Lakers game or something.
Whatever you're doing, stop it. I hope you die. I hope you effing die. Anyways,
let's go through the rest of the cast pretty quickly on this.
Again, the biggest one I want to talk about is George Dazun.
I'm just going to say George Dazunta. Yeah.
As Detective Gus
Basically, if there was ever a live-action Grimace, he would have played him, like, more or less, is what I think of.
He's like one of the more likable. And again, he talks like a sailor here and there, but overall, he's a good guy. You can tell he's not really as corrupt.
George Dazunza, he's always been good in pretty much everything I've seen him in. I remember he was in The Deer Hunter. It was kind of one of the bigger things I always think of. He was also in the TV version of Salem's Lot. He played that guy whose wife was cheating on him. You remember that whole character? Yeah. He was also in Crimson Tide.
He voiced Perry White in Superman Brainiac Attacks. So there you go.
Oh, yeah, I'm seeing that. He was in... Perry White also in Batman Superman movie. World's Finest.
Batman and Mr. Free Sub-Zero is Dr. Gregory Belson. I remember that voice actually now I'm thinking about it.
So, yeah, he worked in a lot of... But yeah, he's really funny. He has my favorite line reading in the movie of "Oh man,"
and he just like throws his hands up, like I give up.
Yeah,
I can't handle it,
But yeah, he's randomly they call him Cowboy all the time because he goes to these like cowboy bars, these like honky tonks.
Yeah, and there is that one shot of Michael Douglas wearing a cowboy hat.
He takes the hat from him, puts it on,
and that's just one of those things like.
And he's eating like a bowl of chili with like Tabasco he's putting in it.
There's certain stars that you just can't imagine being in westerns or in wearing a cowboy hat. Like I can't imagine like Cary Grant being in a western exactly. You know what I mean? Michael Douglas in that moment, while it's kind of funny to see, you're like, oh yeah, I can't really imagine
he's
Michael
too
Douglas
sterile looking. Yeah, I mean he's very much
more
of
modern
his era of like.
Modern man of the 80s or 90s.
Yeah, he's like a cop or he's a businessman or
something slimy and
disreputable. Basically, or a lawyer, whatever.
I mean, I will say, like, there
somebody
are
who plays for Manchester City, all the scumbags, just somebody.
He does play kind of an adventurer in.
That's a little more believable.
Well, that's more modern too. And oh God, what do we call it? We were just talking about it a little bit ago. Romancing the Stone.
Yeah.
So. That's more modern.
He was romancing the stone in this movie, Hubba Hubba.
There you go. Is there any other people you want to shout out? Jean Triplehorn actually has a pretty big role as Dr. Beth Gardner.
Yeah.
She's kind of a side love interest to Douglas. She was basically playing this psychologist or psychiatrist he was seeing. Because right before the movie had happened, he had basically shot some tourists. It doesn't really totally go in depth about what that was, but he was cleared of wrongdoing, but he probably lied about the circumstances of it, as it that implies. And so he's seeing her, but then it turns out that she had this whole history with Sharon Stone's character, Tramiel, and that she had like a brief love affair with her in college, and she became obsessed with her, and that is then all later used to say, oh, she was the one who really committed these murders or whatever. And again, I don't really buy that by the end of the movie. I feel like the movie, because Sharon Stone is so maniacal and so exacting that I could just simply say, oh, well, she she, covered it up, and
Right.
she just made sure it looked like it was her. Or whatever,
Well, also, it doesn't matter what we think because the ending does say, no, she did do it. So it's like, okay, then it doesn't matter. But yeah, Jan Triplehorn, I think, is fine in it, but some of that stuff's too overwrought. I think, I just want to mention a couple more people here. Wayne Knight, of course, appears rant for some reason. Love Wayne Knight, but
it is very funny that he's in with that very sexy, iconic scene of her doing that.
And there's that moment he's bending forward to look, and then Michael Douglas kind of looks at him. He's like, oh, and kind of, Daniel Von Bargen is Lieutenant Marty Nielsen. He's that guy that's Kruger on Seinfeld. So annoying in this. Oh my God, he's so annoying.
Mm-hmm. What happens to him? He dies.
Yeah, there you go.
He also. One thing you can't never forget is that, let's see. Wait, never mind. I thought he was, hold on a minute. He was in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? He's the sheriff in that with the glasses he wears the whole time.
Yeah.
But, anyways.
Looks like somebody in our family we always talk about. Who we talked about on here before, actually. Stephen Tobolowsky is Dr. Lamont.
Who, let me just say, he might appear in next
we'll talk more about Stephen
movie.
Tobolowsky later, but
Literally
his specific performance in this movie...
He's barely in it,
he's like, you were dealing with dealing with a total psychotic mind. Like, they are extremely dangerous. Like, this whole thing, it's just like, you need to back up. Like, But yeah, that makes me think of that line reading in Young Frankenstein, which I was watching on TV the other day, where he's like, "You were talking about the ravings of a lunatic mind. Dead is dead. But what about hearts and kidneys? Hearts and kidneys are tinker toys."
That doesn't, you saying that reminds me of that. This came out very shortly after Silence of the Lambs, and it does seem like in the early 90s there was this obsession with this pop psychology of psychotic minds and like what interesting mysteries they are.
There's another version of that with House of Games, which is an awful movie.
Yeah.
But that's a whole part of that where it's all about like this psychologist and about probability and I don't know, and about schemes and con people. But Stephen Tobolowsky's just kind of funny in this. He gets one scene where he's like, you don't understand, basically, like, about this whole person.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's pretty much the cast and the crew as far as that goes. I think we talked about Verhoeven earlier. As far as erotic, and we kind of talk about erotic thrillers, too, but you want to just talk about the plot?
So, essentially what happens is, as we said earlier, this rock star is killed, and, again,
stabbed with an ice pick.
Yeah, stabbed with an ice pick, and so... Douglas is a homicide detective who's investigating it, and all roads are leading to Sharon Stone's character, who is, again, has this very shadowy, mysterious past. She's randomly like a millionaire who's also started to become a novelist, and her most recent book has some very weird, peculiar connections with the murder of the rock star in terms of
Johnny Boz.
Yeah.
Like, what? Who's basically a Bill Graham figure. Because they're like, oh, he owns that place on Fillmore. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, why?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and so then it's this whole tete-a-tete. The whole thing is basically a dance between him, Michael Douglas, and Sharon Stone about whether or not he really thinks it's her. Are there red herrings there that, or is he actually going to fall in love with her, and does he even care?
There's that big line where he's like, I love you, or I've already fallen in love with you, but I'm going to get you anyway. And he's like, put that in your book or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, F you very much, as he once said. But but then there's all these random side roads that go all over the place. Which are common in
noirs in general.
And then there's the whole Roxy character we haven't even talked about, which is that.
So it's like almost a double of her, who is obsessed with her, and they have her and Stone have a relationship, and
she's jealous.
She then comes to
Michael
resent Douglas because she's kind of sliding in and, becoming her new fling or whatever. And let me just ask this in general. I know sometimes you're frustrated by the plot of noirs. does this fit into some of those criticisms you have
a little bit, but I think it's so lovable and goofy that
and
I
more
can put
modern,
up with
I guess,
it.
more modern sensibility.
But yes, I mean, it is very much that sort of thing as far as like, wow, we're really doing this. Like, oh, there's this woman killed her whole family, and she's like a mentor to her, and it's just like, what?
Yeah.
Why? Like,
Yeah.
why are you doing this? Like,
Yeah.
and then all the stuff with the psychiatrist. Oh, the psychiatrist knew her. She followed her at school, and it's like, and then she says, "Oh no, she followed me actually," and it's a whole thing.
Yeah,
but
that's one of those things. I actually might believe that the psychiatrist became lightly obsessed with her, but then she just used that and weaponized that against her to frame her later. You know,
doesn't matter. But yeah, so yeah, and then. Of course, as always happens, the movie devolves in the ending to there's someone in a black coat, like in a black robe, stabbing someone. And it's just like, what? I remember when I was first watching that movie, and the movie's happening, and I'm like, okay, and I'm thinking I'm about to graduate in about an hour, and I'm like, just watching it, and then I'm like, wait, what?
And that's what I love about
this
genre of movie in general, whether it be neo-noir or like erotic thrillers, is it feels like so much movie packed into one thing. It feels like a shotgun blast of a movie in a good way, or like a very trashy like paperback book that is being adapted into a movie in that way, and that and again, it's we don't have a lot of that now. I feel like the closest thing we had was the work of Gillian Flynn in recent years, as far as Gone Girl being a bigger thing, Sharp Objects as a TV show. So that's the closest thing we have to that anymore. I feel like we don't have that exactly, and again, it's not like it's
Grey is a version of that.
It's certainly not necessarily high literature, but it makes for very entertaining genre films, in that way, that had a studio budget behind it, had big stars behind it, had a weird, interesting director behind it. This movie just feels like, again, in a good way, a very weird, quintessential 90s movie in that way, of all the pieces fell in place. And in that way, thinking about it for you, like how does this fit into the cinema of the 90s to you?
I mean, it's one of the most 90s movies. I think that explicitness of it, of violence and the sexuality, and also the the Talking Heads called Saxon violins. But I think that it's a very 90s movie in that regard. I think as far as being just so flashy and stylish, and it's very De Palma-esque, very De Palma adjacent. So and while still just being Verhoeven.
The same year it came out as Bad Lieutenant, which we've done in the past, of course, on here. That was another movie that the sexuality of it was very in your face. There is a lot of this movie that is very titillating. Nothing about Bad Lieutenant's titillating. It rubs your face in the excrement and in the genitals and makes you feel, oh my God, this is awful. And this has fun with it and is like, ooh, let's kind of like indulge in it, and opens up to a moment where there'd be a lot of college boys pausing it to masturbate with each other. You know what I mean? There is that more explicit but fun, devilish quality to it that in its own way is weirdly more cynical than something that is more both outrageous but heartfelt in like Bad Lieutenant. You know what I mean? If you compare the sex and violence of those movies together. But
do you want to talk about some of just the sense of humor of this movie? There's a couple moments, like stuff like, just for example, just like the way that they tease each other throughout the movie the whole time, especially her, like where he's getting ice out. And she has an ice pick, and she's like, here, let me do it. And she's like, you like watching me do it, don't you? And like stuff like that, that's very just like weird pointed phrases that are just like, who would ever say something like that? That's so weird. Like, you know.
To the point where you can't imagine Sharon Stone's character ever having a casual moment in her life. Everything is this, and I think this is actually more good than not, because it just adds to the arch absurdity of the melodrama of the movie. Everything she does is like an orchestrated performance. Nothing can just be a casual, I'm going to go walk to the bathroom. It's, I'm going to go walk to the bathroom and give you a look while I'm doing it. Like, it's just everything has an extra apostrophe
Well, it's like
on
literally
top
the
of
only reason why she probably didn't straight up admit to the murder was because she had plans to do other things that would be prevented if she happened to be in jail, for instance.
Mhm.
Like, that's how much she doesn't care,
and
really.
to that point,
because she pretty
yeah.
much leads him on the whole movie. There's that scene where she's like, I'm only going to let you know what I want you to know. That's not at all a denial of anything, you know.
Right.
Even though she did deny that she did it to the other police, she never really does that with him exactly.
And she gets off by admitting but not admitting everything.
right.
And I mean, she has two moments in this movie where she could kill him. And I feel like the first one's not quite as tense to me. Because it's in the middle of the movie, so like, well, Michael Douglas isn't about to die in the middle of this. Had that happened and it was Gus's movie, all of a sudden, that would have been a fascinating, divergence.
Like...
But like the one at the end is like a little more, I think, tense, and like especially by that point in the movie. But the decision to not do that is literally Verhoeven winking at the audience, like, "I got you, didn't I? Oh, you thought it was going to happen, but it didn't." And so, and there's this, it's like a weirdly grim yet satisfying joke in the way the movie ends, in terms of like taking you and thinking you that's going to happen, and then letting you off the hook, and you kind of have a nervous sigh of relief at the end of it that he wasn't killed. And I think in that way, there's this self-awareness and satirical nature of the movie that, while not as explicit as something like RoboCop or Total Recall or Starship Troopers, still is him winking at the audience and having fun with the material, which I think is what sets Verhoeven apart in terms of an auteur of this world or genre of movie.
Right.
Any other last minute thoughts about Basic Instinct?
No, I just think it's not the best movie. I think it has a lot of problems, but it's something I think a lot about, and it's just a wild movie.
What for you does it, in relation to Hard Boiled, have at all?
Basically none, other than, I think we talked about this earlier because we were asking, what does this have to do with that? Just, I guess, the basic idea of, just popcorn cinema of the time, and violence in movies. I think that's a big kind of part
and also,
of it too.
And both are about law enforcement in their own way.
Yeah, unexpectedly, one group of people's a lot
Nothing
better.
was going on with law enforcement in the early 90s, not that I know of, other than that whole Rodney King thing, whatever happened there, as they said on The Sopranos once.
But yeah, also that one group does their police work a lot better than the other. And both
Which
do
one?
it badly.
I'm trying to think. Well, neither
one is more successful. We'll say that in the end.
Yeah,
a lot of people
Just
die.
waste them away.
A lot of people die.
Destroy a lot of public infrastructure.
Yeah, well,
but,
that doesn't matter.
So that does it for another episode of Overlapping Dialogue. But don't worry, we've got 1993 right on the horizon. Jeff Probst, what have we got next week?
Stay tuned for scenes from our next episode.
Everything's okay. All right, now put your head down. Close your eyes. It'll be over soon. Everything is wonderful. Okay, campers, rise and shine. And don't forget your booties, because it's cold out there today. It's cold out there every day.
This country's largest lake, Chapala, is located near the city of Guadalajara.
What is Mexico?
Leslie.
What is Mexico?
Correct.
Lakes and Rivers 400.
Seneca is the largest of these lakes in west central New York.
What are the Finger Lakes?
Jim.
What are the Finger Lakes?
Correct.
Lakes and Rivers for 600.
This South American lake drains into the smaller lake
What is
in
Titicaca?
Bolivia. Jim.
What is Titicaca?
Correct.
Lakes and Rivers for 1,000.
Milky colored from
What is
glacial
the Rhone?
clay when entering Lake Geneva, this river is clear blue upon exiting. Jim?
What is the Rhone?
The Rhone, good for $1,000. You are $500 off the lead right now.
Let's go to inventors for 200.
This is pitiful.
1,000 people freezing their butts off waiting to worship a rat. What a hype. Sound like they used to mean something in this town. They used to pull the hog out and they used to eat it. You're hypocrites, all of you. You got a problem with what I'm saying, Larry? Untie your tongue and you come out here and talk, huh? Am I upsetting you, Princess? You know, you want a prediction about the weather. You're asking the wrong Phil. I'll give you a winter prediction. It's gonna be cold, it's gonna be gray, and it's gonna last you for the rest of your life.
Those clips you just heard from were from Fearless and Groundhog Day from 1993. Now, on the surface, these movies are very different. If you just look at genre, what they're going for.
Right.
But I would argue, perhaps the most poignant double feature of these two that we've had yet. Both movies are in their own very explicit ways about faith, religion, philosophy, and about people who become almost Christ-like figures in very divergent different ways. To start with Fearless, you know, neither one of us have seen everything from Peter Weir.
No.
But I'm quite liked what I've seen so far, and this is actually my favorite film of his that I've seen. I think Fearless is, to basically briefly talk about what that movie's about. It's basically Jeff Bridges plays a man who is on a plane that crashes, and the vast majority of everybody on the plane dies.
Yeah.
He happens to be one of the few people who does survive. And basically, most of the movie is about him kind of in response to that tragedy, trying to make sense with this realization that, wait a minute, I didn't die. Is there any meaning behind that? And also connecting with Rosie Perez's character in the movie. Levi, what about Fearless to you makes it a movie to talk about with the 90s? Because it's not explicitly a really well-known movie from the 90s. It's not even among the most well-known Peter Weir movies. As far as the 90s, Truman Show is such a huge
and Dead Poets Society.
thing. Yeah, that's from the late 80s.
That was, okay. I didn't remember
they really talked about Peter Weir movie. But Fearless is, I remember when I saw the trailer
or even his
for
earlier movies like The Last Wave or Picnic at Hanging Rock or whatever.
But I remember when I saw the trailer for this years ago, I was like, oh, this looks something very compelling. This is going to only be the second time we've seen it. What about Fearless stuck out to you the first time you saw it, and was a movie that we? Why did we kind of go? Oh, we need to revisit that and talk about that again.
Well, it has one of the great trailers I've ever seen. Uses "Where the Streets Have No Name" in it, which anytime I hear that song, I'm like, oh yeah. That movie, you talk about this a lot, but I think it fits into that 90s spiritualism of something like Forrest Gump, but it's like way better than that. Yeah. But of just that question of what is it like to live in this totally dangerous modern world. And this even predates 9/11 or other.
And rewatching that clip, I didn't really think about 9/11 a lot the first time I saw the movie, but rewatching that clip, my mind went more to that.
I was thinking about the ending of United 93. But just I guess the.
It's almost like a superhero movie without any action scenes or whatever, but it has like a certain tragedy and a weight to it that obviously they don't have. And that way it reminds me of Unbreakable from Shyamalan, which I think it's quite a bit better movie than that, but it's a similar story. But
as far as like someone who actually isn't even really invincible, because I don't think the movie ever leads us to believe that's true. I don't.
And there's he questions himself whether or not he is, he isn't.
The point is, the point of that movie, though, I think, is the idea of what is it like to be an American who thinks that themselves and the country are indestructible, but the emotional toll that takes on the mind in its own way, even though we're not actually indestructible. But I think coming to the end of the 20th century and kind of that American exceptionalism, especially after the 80s, too, I think that's maybe a whole metaphor in the movie is like that, literally the fearlessness of that. Juxtaposed with the reality. I mean, a scene I think about all the time is that scene where he's driving the car at the brick wall. And Rosie Perez is there, And
they make for, by the way, a very
yeah.
interesting, odd pairing that you
Yeah.
wouldn't immediately jump to mind, but they were really good together.
And this is honestly more of a thing probably talk about next week, but I'll go ahead and talk about it since we're talking about it, is that she lost her son in the crash. And because there were a lot of survivors. A lot of people did survive it, but also a lot of people died. And she feels all this guilt about what could I have done, you know. And he literally gives her like a toolbox or a fire extinguisher. Mm-hmm. And he's driving at the brick wall, and he's like, hold on to your baby, hold on. And it's kind of funny when you're watching it in the moment, because it's just like, this is so like ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But then they crash into the brick wall, and it flies through the windshield and like is out of her hands or whatever. And that's her way of realizing that she couldn't have done anything, and that's like a palliative measure for her to move on.
Yeah.
And I think about that scene all the time of just like I said, when I first saw it, I kind of laughed, but now I just think about it all the time of just the immense drama of a scene like that. And just, it's literally one of the most serious movies I've ever seen as far as what it's
trying to say,
actually about. Is just, and we were watching the scene that you heard,
the plane crash.
But I think even more about the scene, that's actually the ending of the movie, although that's earlier in the movie.
Yeah.
And that him literally after that, he's literally laying on the floor having this flashback.
Yeah.
And him like hyperventilating and like bringing himself back from the memory. And that's the end of the movie. There's no real like conclusion exactly. The movie just which is in itself a conclusion.
Yeah.
I think about that all the time, just specifically the ending and just like what that movie is. It's a really powerful movie. I know it kind of became sort of a punchline in that decade of like, oh, one of these kind of movies, but I feel like it's way better than that. Mm-hmm. And the way people treat it, I think, is really great cast too. It's got John Turturro, like I said, Rosie Perez. It also has Tom Hulse in it randomly in some scenes. So yeah, I'll be happy to revisit that.
Yeah, because it's one that I really loved back when we had first seen it, and I thought about a lot.
And you liked it a little more than I did at
Isabella
the time.
Rossellini plays his wife.
That's who else it was. I couldn't remember. There was somebody else. Yeah. And you liked it a little more than I did, but the more I have thought about that movie, the better it's gotten. So I'm happy to revisit that.
And I want to talk about this more next week. But Jeff Bridges is a really great actor.
He is.
Because I feel like now
he's known as the pothead actor,
the dude, or like there's a series of things he's been in. Like Hell or High Water, which I think he is good in, or
Crazy Heart,
But I mean, I'm a huge fan of The Fisher King, and this came out 2 years after
and
that.
Even his work with Michael Cimino, I think has been really
and
good.
I really, I think when he's specifically doing something dramatic, he is really great, and he reminds me sort of like Jeff Daniels, that he can do comedy or drama both really well. But I think he's a really great actor and gives a really great performance in this especially. But I really love him in The Fisher King a lot too. That's one of my favorites. Speaking of Groundhog Day, that's not a movie I've seen all that much. I know it's one of those one of the most iconic movies, and a movie that probably has one of the biggest philosophical messages for something that is as widely seen as it is,
and is as funny as
and
it
is
is
as good as it is and funny as it is. That's of course Michael Murray. The Lost Murray brothers.
Michael Murray. What about Michael Murphy? Imagine Michael Murphy in that role. You better sober up.
It's very serious. But Bill Murray.
If a frog had wings, he wouldn't bump his ass so much. It's like, what? But anyway, yeah.
Now I'm trying to think of like Bill Murray in the Warren Beatty role.
Speaking of the philosophy of this movie, before we talk about how funny it is, a scene I think of from this movie all the time, Groundhog Day, is that scene where there's the old man that has a heart attack every day.
Yeah.
And he's always going back there and trying to save him. And there's the one scene where it shows it happening. You can tell it's happened a million times or whatever. And that he just finally kneels there and realizes there's no way I can save this person.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of speaks to the whole movie in its own way about... There's two kind of main messages in the movie. There's the more obvious message, which is if you got to relive your mistakes, you could perfect yourself as a person, or like your reflection is its own reliving the past over and over. And if I would have done this, how would this have been different? And kind of, I don't know, it's kind of an unanswerable question of like, if we relive the past, would it be any better, or would we be better, or what, you know? And that kind of just, I think it's just overall a sense of reflection on life, and also recognizing the both futility of the everyday and also the things we don't pay attention to that are actually really important. But there's also that whole counter message, I think, or kind of alternate message of the movie, which is that the futility of trying to change the past, or things will inevitably happen anyway. That whole kind of idea, like I said, that I think is interesting. All that's to say, like you said, it's a very deep movie for a movie that's very funny and is consistently darkly comedic, I think.
Yeah.
Also, it's important to note the first time I saw this movie fully was the day that we found out that Philip Seymour Hoffman had died. Not that that's of any particular note. That was a Super Bowl Sunday that was also a Groundhog Day, randomly. But that's just something that's always stuck with me as being kind of part of that narrative. I don't really know what that even means, necessarily, but
I've only seen the movie like maybe twice. I think maybe only once the whole way through. I can't quite remember.
I've seen it on TV a lot.
It's a movie that is now an idiom.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Groundhog Day. Yeah, people use that to say, oh, it's the same thing over and over. Our dear great Aunt Sarah's birthday was on Groundhog Day, so that's always a little thing that I think about a little bit with this movie.
Also, the day that you and Mom and Dad moved into the house that we're living in.
In 94, it would have been, yeah. I want to see this movie again and think about it more. And I think this is true of a lot of things after a certain point, that they get talked to death and they become the metaphor so strongly that people don't really see what's the thing that's right in front of them the whole time, is that it's about reliving the past, but it's about, are you content with the life that you have or not? And sometimes when these things happen, again, the metaphor becomes so strong, people forget about what's it about in a more granular way. Not like this big arch metaphor, but in a granular way. Are you content to surround yourself with people and live lives where you are around the same people all the time, you get into a habit and do all the same things? That I think the film is less interesting as a literal, what if I did that, and more of a reflection on, we all live our own versions of Groundhog Day during various periods of our lives, not literally, but figuratively. And do we react with cynicism, and do we react with anger, as Bill Murray initially does? Or do we find the fine poetry that is life, which he eventually comes to that point? And
that's when he finally gets out of it, is when he has his best day, I think, ultimately. But,
because early on, he figures out what's going on, and he's like, well, I've got to kill myself. And so there's and it's kind of funny, it's dark when you really think about it, but it's, because he always goes back to the loop, and so he always constantly wakes up to, I got you, babe, which is one of those songs that is probably now, outside of any context that it has, I weirdly think about its use at the very end of Mad Men Season 4 as a meta. He is in his own Groundhog Day. Like, I think that's very explicitly like, connecting to the legacy of Groundhog Day and the use of that. But again, I think that the film to me is less interesting in the literal what if I was stuck in this, and more about the granular philosophical reflection of life itself, And as you said, that he eventually makes peace and comes to terms with it, and that's when he's able to break out of this weird sense of purgatory or hell on earth that he's found himself in. You know,
I think that another whole, you said, and like I was saying, is the whole conception of the movie is the idea of thinking about what it must be like to be a person who covers Groundhog Day, the Groundhog Day phenomenon as a weatherman. And how ugly the day looks, how gray it is.
How dumb the whole thing is.
Yeah, and just that whole idea of how stupid all of this really is. And thinking about, what if you had to live that every single day? Like you said, that question of, are you content with your life? And ultimately, that's the question. Now, that's a very, heightened version of that.
Yeah, right.
But I feel like it,
Ever so briefly before we end this, touch on Bill Murray. I mean, there's a reason why this is one of the most iconic Bill Murray movies. And I think this was, because there's the whole, Bill Murray can be serious now, which happened in the mid to late 90s, and, his transition into working with a lot of Wes Anderson stuff, his first one being Rushmore.
Right.
But, this is a comedy, but I think this is the perfect, to me, even still, other than maybe Life Aquatic, I'd say Life Aquatic and this, the perfect distillation of how Bill Murray can be a great movie star in terms of he can be very funny, he can be very dry, very witty, but also have a sense of drama and a sense of patience that sometimes comic actors do not have. You know what I mean? And that he very clearly was aging into over the by this
one of my
point.
favorite scenes, this is one of his more comedic scenes, is where he's having that first date with
Andy McDowell,
and it plays it over and over, and it's like, and him basically figuring out how to talk to her because he's like,
because he's had all these chances to do it,
and now he keeps doing it, and that's just funny to see her get mad at him over their just interplay keeps happening, and it feels like it's like just within seconds, is the way it's edited. But you think this is probably, which I mean, I think Harold Ramis, the director, has said that it was like over thousands of years he thought that he lived in that loop or whatever, I don't know. But that's what I like to think, is it's like almost an eternity,
Yeah.
And just how long that goes on.
Even making this movie, to put your thinking cap on the thing about, you imagine how surreal making this movie would have been. You're on like take 13 of this one scene, and then you're doing a take, and then you're doing a different version of that scene in the script on another day. You're
like
in 12 takes of that
the clock, or
and
him
just
doing something else to the clock.
How strange that had to have been to make this movie in terms of the depths of everything going on with it. But both great movies. Again, I think both. I think a lot of people know about Groundhog Day, and it's a pretty well known movie. But I think Fearless, it makes sense why it's not as well known, because it's a very grave, serious, somber movie.
And a great movie.
And a great movie, too,
so
obviously.
We can't have those.
Yeah.
Not that Groundhog Day isn't pretty great. I'm just saying. But great movies tend to get overlooked because, we don't want those.
Yeah. So, we'll get into both of those next week. This is Kyle.
This is Levi.
Take care. God bless.
Go to hell, Manchester City.
So nice. Goodbye.